Chapter 3301. Don't go back on your words, Jun Aoqing. When Ye Tian saw the familiar face in the sky, his eyes trembled as he yelled out the other party's name. Jun Aoqing really appeared. Back when Ye Tian had left the land of the abandoned, Jun Aoqing had left with him, and the two of them had come to the Holy Soul Academy together. But at that time, Ye Tian had enemies all around him. To ensure Jun Aoqing's safety, Ye Tian got her to become the disciple of one of the Saint Soul's 3 elders, Granny Tang. After that, Ye Tian never saw Jun Aoqing again. He never expected that when the two of them met again, Jun Aoqing would be under someone's control. Ye Tian. As soon as Jun Aoqing saw Ye Tian, her beautiful eyes slightly shrank. Her body trembled as tears gushed out of her eyes and flowed down her cheeks. When Ye Tian saw this scene, he felt as if his heart was being stabbed with a knife. His blood was surging and he was on the verge of losing control of his anger. He failed to protect Jun Aoqing and caused her to suffer. At this moment, he felt as if his heart was being torn apart. "It's you!" At this moment, the black-clothed cultivator beside Jun Aoqing recognized Ye Tian and yelled out, "Ye Tian!" This black-clothed cultivator actually knew Ye Tian. 7 Calamities of the Ghost Valley. Ye Tian abruptly raised his head with killing intent flickering in his eyes. He fixed his gaze on the black-clothed cultivator and yelled out the latter's name. This black-clothed cultivator was the 7 Calamities of the Ghost Valley. Back in the abandoned land, the 7 Calamities of the Ghost Valley were the first to appear from the heavenly evil family. They had fought with Jun Aoqing's grandfather, Jun Chujian, but they were defeated by Jun Chujian. After that, the heavenly evil Shaoqian and heavenly evil Monarch appeared. To think that the 7 disasters of the Ghost Valley would appear once again. The heavenly evil monarch came to the sacred soul domain with the 9 tribulation profound sovereign, but the reason why he took so long was to look for Jun Aoqing. When he first entered the sacred soul region, he sensed the aura of Jun Aoqing's netherworld ghost meridian. The heavenly evil family and the netherworld family shared the same origin. There was a strong resonance between the heavenly evil profound veins and the netherworld ghost veins. Because of this, he wanted to obtain Jun Aoqing's netherworld ghost meridian. The heavenly evil Xian veins and the nether ghost veins were 2 great connate martial veins. Both were born from heaven and earth, and they could fuse with each other. The heavenly evil monarch wanted to plunder Jun Aoqing's nether ghost bloodline and fuse it with his to create a stronger Xiantian martial meridian. It was so much so that even Jun Chujian's destruction of the Netherworld Empire was planned by the heavenly evil monarch. For the Netherworld bloodline, the heavenly evil monarch was willing to pay any price. However, Ye Tian's appearance in the land of abandonment had disrupted the heavenly evil monarch's plan. If it wasn't for Ye Tian, the heavenly evil monarch would have already obtained the Netherworld Ghost Meridian. After the heavenly evil monarch determined Jun Aoqing's location, he initially wanted to make a move himself. However, he was worried that something might happen to the 9 tribulation Xian sovereign, so he handed it over to the 7 Calamities of the Ghost Valley. The 7 Calamities of the Ghost Valley did not disappoint him and managed to capture Jun Aoqing. "Your strength, how?" At this moment, the 7 Calamities of the Ghost Valley looked at Ye Tian. When they sensed the latter's strength, their eyes trembled as they opened their mouths in shock. However, they lost their voices twice. They couldn't believe their eyes. Ye Tian's strength has actually reached the 8th order pseudo-sage realm. It was so much so that the aura that Ye Tian was displaying wasn't any weaker than the heavenly evil monarch. How is that possible? Back in the land of abandonment, Ye Tian was just an ant. How long had it been? Only a few years had passed, yet Ye Tian had grown to such a terrifying level. His talent was freakish to the extreme. A few years was just a blink of an eye for a deity realm cultivator. However, Ye Tian had undergone a complete transformation, which was too shocking. Just what did Nye Tian experience for his strength to grow to such a height? Are you shocked? Nye Tian's gaze was cold as he looked at the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley. Cold. The killing intent in his gaze made the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley feel suffocated. It was so much so that they even felt their bones trembling. Right now, Nye Tian had grown to a height that even the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley could only look up to. Nye Tian, it's time for you to make a move. At this moment, the heavenly evil monarch spoke out with a cold light flickering in his eyes. When he looked at the Emperor tablet, his eyes flickered with a blazing radiance. Heavenly evil monarch, if you dare to harm Jun Aoqing, I will annihilate the entire heavenly evil family. Nye Tian abruptly turned around with his gaze fixed on the heavenly evil monarch and threatened. Sensing Nye Tian's killing intent, the heavenly evil monarch's gaze trembled as he said, "As long as you destroy the Emperor tablet, I will definitely not harm the Netherworld princess. You'd better not go back on your word." Nye Tian replied coldly. He then fixed his gaze on the Emperor tablet. "As long as you can do it, I will definitely not go back on my word." The heavenly evil monarch coldly smiled. In his heart, he was thinking that it's impossible for Nye Tian to do it. There was a powerful formation in the Emperor's steel. If one couldn't find the eye of the formation, even a Sage Realm warrior might not be able to break the Emperor's steel. The reason why he wanted Nye Tian to make a move on the Emperor tablet was to use it to kill Nye Tian. Looking at the Emperor tablet, Nye Tian sensed the runes on it with a sharp light flickering in his eyes. He knew what the heavenly evil monarch was thinking about. But how could he, Nye Tian, be killed by an Emperor tablet? Nye Tian, it's done. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice resounded and a diagram of an array appeared in Nye Tian's mind. Nye Tian nodded and focused his soul awareness on the spell formation's structure. It wasn't a complicated array, but he could see that all the runes were gathered at the center, which was the core of the array, the core of the array. Apart from that, there were also 9 large formation inscriptions that gathered around the eye of the formation, like stars surrounding the moon. Nye Tian, do you see those 9 secondary cores? Then, the Ghost Emperor said, these 9 secondary formation cores exist to protect the formation core. Destroy the 9 secondary formation cores first, then attack the real formation core. Alright. Nye Tian heavily nodded his head with a blaze flickering in his eyes. At this moment, he naturally wouldn't act rashly. He had to listen to the Ghost Emperor's explanation. This array wasn't complicated, and the 9 secondary cores were easy to find. But if he was in a hurry and made a move on the core, then the person who made a move would be instantly reduced to ashes. Taking a deep breath, Nye Tian was prepared to make a move. Boom! He once again activated the Sky Evolution Holy Body, and his aura surged wildly. All the power gathered on his palm, and then he clenched it into a fist and punched out. The huge fist shadow was like a giant beast, roaring and rushing towards the Imperial Tablet. Chapter 3302. Ghost Valley's Emperor's Coffin. The array in the Emperor Tablet was a Saint-grade array that was filled with killing intent. The moment it was triggered, even a Sage Realm cultivator would be instantly killed. In the heavenly evil monarch's view, it's impossible for Nye Tian to know about the Emperor Tablet's array. Furthermore, even if Nye Tian knew about it, it's impossible for him to resolve the array in such a short period of time, unless Nye Tian was a Saint-grade array grandmaster. Nye Tian might not be a Saint-grade array grandmaster, but he had such an existence beside him. Perhaps the heavenly evil monarch would be filled with endless disappointment when he punched out. That guy actually made a move on the Emperor's steel. In the distance, the eyes of the crowd trembled as they looked at Nye Tian. No one knew what was going to happen next. Rumble. Boom. In the air, the shadow of the fist was like a wild beast. It arrived in an instant and bombarded the gigantic Emperor Tablet, causing the entire tablet to tremble. After that, a huge crack appeared on the Emperor Tablet. Nie Tian's fist had actually pierced through the Emperor tablet. This! Everyone squinted their eyes as they sucked in a cold breath with dumbfounded expressions. Nie Tian was too powerful, and a single punch from him was so terrifying. The Emperor tablet wasn't made of ordinary materials, since it was 1,000 meters thick. However, it was pierced through by Nie Tian, which was simply unimaginable. Nie Tian had already gone through 2 major battles, yet his aura hadn't weakened in the slightest. Everyone couldn't help feeling curious about how much energy Nie Tian possessed. But no one knew that the most terrifying aspect of the Emperor tablet was the array within it. Although Nie Tian's fist might seem reckless, it had actually avoided the array's killing intent, preventing the array's power from being triggered. And the heavenly evil monarch exclaimed with his eyes widened. The shock in his heart could be imagined. He never imagined that not only did Nie Tian's fist fail to trigger the array within the Emperor tablet, it even pierced through it. How is that possible? How could this be? Damn it! In the next moment, the heavenly evil monarch's heart sank before he calmed down and roared in his heart. He must be lucky. He must be lucky. But even the heavenly evil monarch himself did not believe in such a guess. The horizontal imperial steel was huge, comparable to a mountain. Nie Tian was actually able to accurately find the weakness of the imperial steel. Was this really luck? Heavenly evil monarch, have I disappointed you? Nie Tian suddenly turned around with disdain in his eyes as he looked at the heavenly evil monarch with a sneer. Disappointed? The heavenly evil monarch's face froze before he smiled. Nie Tian, how can I be disappointed that you managed to destroy the Emperor tablet? At this moment, he was certain that Nie Tian was not lucky at all. He had seen through the array of the imperial steel. But why was that? Nie Tian was clearly so young. It was impossible for him to have such a high attainment in array formations. The Tao of arrays was even more complicated than the martial Tao. Even a genius in the Tao of arrays would have to wait a few tens of thousands of years before they could have any achievement. Furthermore, the array in the Emperor tablet was a saint array, so how could Nie Tian see through it? Could it be that there's a hidden expert beside him? The heavenly evil monarch's eyes trembled as he made a guess in his heart. His face instantly turned pale with beads of sweat covering his forehead. How terrifying was someone that could see through the saint array in such a short period of time. Evil Lord, calm down. At this moment, the 9 Tribulation Sovereign came to the heavenly evil monarch's side and said, "Since we can study the Emperor tablet and know about the array, that means that Brat can as well." The 9 Tribulation Sovereign had also seen through it and was certain that Nie Tian knew about the Emperor tablet's array. The heavenly evil monarch and the rest had long known about the array, so they weren't afraid. Their original plan was to kill Nie Tian with the Emperor's steel formation, then break the formation and take out the items inside. However, Nie Tian was a surprise that they hadn't expected. That's right. That must be it. That brat is the same as us, and he has long known about the array. The heavenly evil monarch reminded as he confirmed his guess. After all, Nie Tian was from the Saint Soul Academy, and he had many secrets to begin with. Heavenly evil monarch, watch carefully as I destroy the Emperor tablet. At this moment, Nie Tian sneered and continued to attack. He punched out again, and with every punch, a huge crack would appear on the Emperor's steel. In the blink of an eye, the 9 subsidiary array cores were destroyed by Nie Tian. 9 cave-like things appeared on the horizontal imperial steel. Furthermore, they were arranged in a very orderly manner. They were connected together and formed a huge ring. At the center of the ring, the Emperor tablet's array core was located. Everyone was dumbfounded as they widened their mouths, but they couldn't make a sound. At this moment, Nie Tian had become an unfathomable existence in their eyes. The 9 Tribulation Sovereign and Heavenly Evil Monarch were dumbfounded as the shock in their hearts couldn't be described. Even if the two of them made a move, they wouldn't be as decisive as Nye Tian. Next, shatter the Emperor tablet. Nye Tian swept a glance at the 9 tribulations sovereign and heavenly evil monarch with a cold smile. Boom! Shortly after, his aura soared into the sky and his celestial evolution Saint physique grew by quite a bit, causing space to tremble as if it was being torn apart. Next, Nye Tian gathered all of his strength in his arm and punched out. In the direction of his fist, a fist shadow pounced forward like an ancient wild beast, ripping the surrounding space and causing it to shake violently. Boom! In the next moment, the shadow of the fist descended with a bang and bombarded the core of the formation. A muffled explosion resounded in the air, and the shadow of the fist actually collapsed in an instant, transforming into numerous violent waves that raged through the space. Everyone's eyes trembled as they tensed up. The 9 tribulations sovereign and heavenly evil monarch's eyes trembled with excitement. That's because the thing in the Emperor tablet was about to be born. Crack! At that moment, the huge Emperor's steel suddenly cracked. A crack appeared on the eye of the formation. Then, it cracked like a spider web and instantly spread to the entire Emperor's steel. Crack, crack, crack! Cracks covered the entire Emperor's steel. They were formed by the collapse of the formation patterns. Break! Nye Tian squinted his eyes and his celestial evolution Saint physique disappeared. He then took a step forth and a sword whistled out, slamming against the Emperor tablet. Rumble! Bam bam bam! The Emperor's steel shook for a moment before it crumbled. Huge rocks flew out and fell to the ground. Nye Tian's eyes suddenly lit up. Through the flying rubble, he saw a huge black coffin floating high in the sky, emanating a terrifying aura that filled the entire heaven and earth with a creepy, gruesome aura. Chapter 3303. Bloodline Restriction. The Ghost Valley's Emperor's Coffin. The 9 tribulations sovereign and heavenly evil monarch looked at the black coffin floating in the sky with their faces changing, and they exclaimed. The secret that they had been waiting for was the Ghost Valley's Emperor's Coffin. There was a shocking item hidden in the Ghost Valley's Emperor's Coffin. The Ghost Valley's Emperor's Coffin. When Nye Tian heard the 9 tribulations sovereign and heavenly evil monarch's voices, he squinted his eyes and flew towards the coffin. Don't get close. But at this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice resounded in panic. Hovering in midair, Nye Tian's expression flickered as he came to a stop. Rustle! The moment he came to a stop, the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin suddenly trembled. Then, a streak of blood-colored light shot out of the coffin. It was so sharp that it tore a space-time rift in the air and shot towards Nye Tian. Nye Tian exclaimed in surprise as he felt a suffocating chill assaulting his face. At this moment, he felt the threat of death. That unremarkable crimson luster actually possessed the ability to kill him. In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian reacted and tilted his body slightly. The blood-colored light brushed past his chest, leaving a deep wound on his chest. Blood gushed out of the wound and instantly dyed his lower body red. Nye Tian squinted his eyes as he looked at the wound on his chest with an unsightly expression. There was a black aura coming from the wound, and it showed no signs of healing. Damn it! Nye Tian roared as he endured the pain and forcefully unleashed the Terra Vein's origin. A brief moment later, the wound started to heal. But at this moment, Nye Tian's face was as pale as paper. What a close call! Looking at the wound on his chest, he let out a long breath with lingering fear in his heart. If it wasn't for the Ghost Emperor's reminder, he would have definitely been killed by the crimson luster. That blood-colored light was extremely sharp. If he was hit by it head-on, he would definitely be killed instantly. Nye Tian's impulsiveness almost cost him his life. He did not expect that after the Ghost Valley Emperor coffin was unsealed, there would still be such a terrifying killing intent. The crowd stared at Nye Tian in shock for a long time. Then, a look of disappointment appeared on their faces, as if they were regretful that Nye Tian wasn't killed by the blood-colored light. Today, the strength that Nye Tian had displayed was too shocking. Everyone felt that he shouldn't exist, that he shouldn't live. The 9 tribulation mystic sovereign and the heavenly evil monarch even looked regretful. They didn't know how Nye Tian had sensed the danger at the last moment. Nye Tian stabilized his body and looked at the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin with a gloomy gaze. His face could not help but change. He saw a layer of blood-red runes flowing outside the Emperor's coffin. Its aura was cold and dark, and it was extremely powerful. Earlier, the blood-colored light was formed by those blood-red runes, and it nearly took Nye Tian's life. It's a bloodline restriction. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice resounded. So the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin has a powerful bloodline restriction that forbids others from approaching. Only those from the Ghost Valley clan can approach. And them? Nye Tian's gaze sank as he understood what was going on. The bloodline restriction outside the Emperor's coffin was to prevent outsiders from approaching the Emperor's coffin. Evidently, the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin was left behind by an expert of the Ghost Valley clan for the descendants of the Ghost Valley clan. Those 2 celestial evolution saint souls should be left behind by an ancestor of the Ghost Valley clan. The Ghost Emperor's face sank as he continued, "If I'm not wrong, the one lying in the coffin should be an ancestor of the Ghost Valley clan." Hearing the Ghost Emperor's words, Nye Tian's eyes couldn't help but turn cold. He couldn't hide the shock on his face as he asked, "Could it be that the body of the Ghost Valley clan's ancestor is lying in the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin?" "It's very possible." The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled, and he said heavily, "This." Nye Tian's face stiffened and he was speechless. The ancestor of the Ghost Valley clan should be a powerful existence. Since he was able to set up the traversing heavenly seal and the formation in the Emperor's steel, it undoubtedly meant that the ancestor of the Ghost Valley clan was definitely a peak existence in the Sage realm. In other words, the corpse of a saint was lying in the coffin of the Ghost Valley Emperor. The corpse of a sage was a very precious thing. Thinking about it, the bones of those saints that had fallen for countless years could cause a crazy fight between warriors. How precious would a complete corpse of a saint be? It was no exaggeration to say that if the news of the corpse of a saint were to spread, it would set off a shocking wave in the Myriad domain. The power contained in the corpse of a saint was related to the Sage realm, and it was something that everyone in the Myriad domain yearned for. It was no wonder why the 9 Profound sect would send out 2 sovereigns for the Emperor's steel. 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley snatched the Emperor's coffin. At this moment, the heavenly evil monarch suddenly looked at the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley and roared, "Roger!" The 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley's eyes trembled as they tossed June ouching towards the heavenly evil monarch before their silhouettes moved. They were like streaks of light as they flew towards the Emperor's coffin. "Dream on!" Nye Tian's face sank as he shouted in a low voice. Sword intent erupted from his entire body, and it was fierce and murderous like a tsunami as it charged towards the sky. At this moment, he finally understood why the heavenly evil monarch brought the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley to the Sacred Soul domain. So it turned out that it was to open the Emperor's coffin. There was a powerful bloodline restriction around the Emperor's coffin, and aside from the Ghost Valley clan, no one could approach it. Evidently, the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley were cultivators of the Ghost Valley clan. But with Nye Tian here, how could he allow the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley to approach the Emperor's coffin? Saint Heaven-defying sword, sun-defying sword. In the next moment, Nye Tian let out a bellow and slashed out with the star heavenly slash. Sword shadows whizzed through the air like dragons, carrying torrential killing intent. They sealed off a part of the void and charged madly towards the 7 calamities of the Ghost Vale. The 7 disasters of the Ghost Valley suddenly felt an immense pressure pressing down on them, causing their expressions to change. They immediately unsheathed their long swords and slashed towards the incoming pressure. Rumble! In the next moment, the 2 swords clashed together, causing space to tremble as if it was on the verge of collapsing. Instantly, boundless sword intent swept out. The 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley were forced back a few thousand meters. At this moment, even without the Sky Evolution Saint Soul, Nye Tian could easily suppress the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley. How did your sword intent become so powerful? The 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley stabilized their silhouettes, and their faces changed as they looked at Nye Tian with fear in their eyes. They never expected that Nye Tian's sword intent would be so terrifying. It wasn't any weaker than his and was even vaguely suppressing him. At this moment, Nye Tian was clearly a transcendent realm swordsman. But how was that possible? Back then, when Nye Tian was in the Forsaken Land, his sword Dao was still weak. In just a few years, Nye Tian had grown to the transcendent realm. His comprehension of sword Dao was too terrifying. With me around, no one can approach the Emperor's coffin. Nye Tianling smiled as a terrifying sword aura surged from his body. Nye Tian. But at this moment, the heavenly evil monarch's voice resounded. If you don't want the Netherworld princess to die, then retreat. Chapter 3304. Saint Corp's baleful aura boom. In the void, an invisible force came crashing down, enveloping June Ouching and imprisoning her. The space around her instantly tightened. Ouching! Nye Tian squinted his eyes as he roared. The blood in his body started to boil with rage surging in his body. He felt like he was on the verge of exploding. Nye Tian, retreat! The heavenly evil monarch coldly said with killing intent in his eyes. He slightly increased the strength in his hand, causing June Ouching to feel suffocated. June Ouching's face was covered in sweat. Her face was unsightly, but she did not make a sound. Evidently, she was trying her best to endure. Heavenly evil monarch! As Nye Tian let out an explosive roar, he unleashed an aura that resembled that of a mad, wild, and terrifying beast. The void around him exploded, as if it had been ripped apart by his sword intent. At this moment, Nye Tian was enraged, truly enraged. When the crowd saw this scene, their eyes couldn't help but tremble. The intense fluctuations coming from the void caused their hearts to tremble uncontrollably. At this moment, when they looked at Nye Tian, it was as if he was no longer a human, but a ferocious beast trapped in a cage. This ferocious beast was roaring at this moment, but when it breaks out of the cage, it would definitely unleash a terrifying power. Retreat! Sensing Nye Tian's terrifying aura, the heavenly evil monarch squinted his eyes with fear. But in the next moment, his face sank and he coldly said. He knew that the more enraged Nye Tian was, the more important June Ouching was in his heart. And the more this was the case, the more it proved that Nye Tian did not dare to risk June Ouching's life. Nye Tian's gaze trembled. Every single drop of blood, bone, and meridians in his body was violently roaring. He wished that he could skin the heavenly evil monarch alive, but he still endured it at this moment. He had to retreat because he really couldn't risk June Ouching's life. The heavenly evil monarch had grasped onto his weakness, forcing him to compromise. Furthermore, the Ghost Valley's Emperor's coffin was too important to the heavenly evil monarch. At this moment, Nye Tian's silhouette started to retreat with his gaze fixed on the heavenly evil monarch. He did not dare to relax. If the heavenly evil monarch dared to harm June Ouching, Nye Tian would definitely kill him without any hesitation. The heavenly evil monarch knew how terrifying Nye Tian was. June Ouching was his greatest trump card, and he didn't dare to kill her. At least not now. In the end, he was already afraid of Tian. Move out. The heavenly evil monarch looked at the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley. The 7 calamities sect. The 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley agreed. They glanced at Nye Tian with lingering fear in their hearts. Then, their figures moved and approached the coffin. He arrived in front of the Emperor's coffin, and sure enough, he did not trigger the restrictions killing intent. The 7 disasters of the Ghost Valley looked at the coffin nervously. After taking a deep breath, they stretched out their palms. Lines of blood spurted out from their fingers and circulated in the air, releasing a powerful bloodline aura. He wanted to use his own bloodline power to break the bloodline restriction of the Ghost Valley Emperor coffin. Swoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the next second, the 7 disasters of the Gigu Valley moved their palms and rays of blood shot out like arrows towards the Emperor's coffin. Boom! Gui Gu's bloodline power descended and merged with the bloodline seal outside the coffin. With a loud bang, the blood runes on the coffin gradually dimmed. A moment later, the crimson rune disappeared. The bloodline restriction on the coffin was removed. Master! The Gui Valley's 7 calamities turned to look at the heavenly evil monarch with joy. Open it! The heavenly evil monarch's lips twitched as his voice trembled. Yeah. The 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley nodded his head and took a step forth. A trace of fanaticism surged in his eyes as he let out a long breath of impure air. Only then did he extend his hand and forcefully open the coffin. Boom! When the coffin was opened, a Een aura spread out and enveloped the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley. The Saint Corpse's ominous aura. The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled as he exclaimed, "What a terrifying aura!" Everyone felt the terrifying ominous aura from over 100,000 meters away. Their faces changed with fear. That aura was too terrifying that it made them feel suffocated. Args! At this moment, the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley suddenly howled. Their voices were extremely mournful. Evidently, they were suffering immense pain. Nye Tian squinted his eyes. He could sense that the Sky Evolution Saint's soul in his body had become active, as if it wanted to separate from his body. What's going on? He knitted his brows with shock on his face. It's the Holy Corpse's ominous aura. It's trying to borrow a body to reincarnate. The Ghost Emperor's face darkened as he said cold. Nye Tian frowned and guarded his mind. The star energy in his body surged and firmly restrained the Sky Evolution Saint's soul. After a while, the ominous aura gradually dissipated and the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley were revealed. They had turned into a pile of bones. Hiss! When the crowd saw this, they could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Their expressions were extremely shocked. The 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley were peak rank 9 pseudo-holiness cultivators. Yet, they were corroded by the ominous aura in an instant, leaving only a pile of bones. The power of the ominous aura was too terrifying. That was close. The Ghost Emperor heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. Fortunately, the person who had fused with the Sky Evolution Saint's soul was Nye Tian. Otherwise, it would have been terrible. The Sky Evolution Saint's soul had fused with the star energy, and it was difficult to break free. If it were anyone else, they would not be able to restrain the Sky Evolution Saint's soul. Once the Sky Evolution Saint's soul left the cultivator's body and fused with the ominous aura, it could instantly possess the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley. It looked like the old monster in the Emperor's coffin had thought of this and set up a bloodline restriction to allow the Ghost Valley clan to approach the Emperor's coffin and possess them. After all, the same bloodline power was more suitable for the Sky Evolution Saint's soul. But it was a pity that the one who fused with the Sky Evolution Saint's soul was Nye Tian. The other Sky Evolution Saint's soul was one of the 9 extremities. The 9 Tribulation Sovereign and Heavenly Evil Monarch looked at the pair of bones in the sky with shock on their faces. They were speechless. They never expected that the 7 calamities of the Ghost Valley would die just like that. At this moment, Nye Tian's silhouette moved as he approached the Emperor's coffin. He wanted to take a look at what was inside the Emperor's coffin. Boom! However, just as he was about to get close to the coffin, a thunderous sound rang out in the sky. After that, a boundless amount of energy appeared, suppressing the void and condensing into a gigantic black palm that emitted a terrifying dark energy, smashing towards him. And Nye Tian knitted his brows as his face changed. The black palm in the sky was extremely powerful. It was even more terrifying than the 9 Tribulation Sovereign who had activated the ominous sage body. This palm was aimed at Nye Tian, and it was clearly trying to kill him in one move. This is. At the same time, the 9 tribulations sovereign and heavenly evil monarch looked at the palm in the sky. They seemed to have sensed something and their faces changed at the same time. They were stunned for a brief moment before they yelled out, Emperor Jiuxian! Emperor Jiuxian, the head of the 9 mystic sects, 5 great sovereigns, the supreme existence of the 9 mystic sect. Chapter 3305. Emperor Jiuxian. The 9 tribulations sovereign and heavenly evil monarch looked up in the sky and sensed a familiar aura. Their eyes trembled and their hearts were filled with shock. The head of the 9 mystic sects, 5 sovereigns, Emperor Jiuxian, had actually come personally. This was something that the 9 tribulations sovereign and heavenly evil monarch never expected, that the corpse of a saint would actually alarm the strongest existence in the 9 mystic sect. Thus, one could tell how precious this corpse was. Boom! High up in the sky, the gigantic palm suddenly descended, causing the void to tremble. Terrifying spacetime cracks appeared in the surrounding space. Waves of spacetime storms rushed out like wild beasts, wanting to devour and annihilate everything. Nye Tian's expression suddenly turned grim as he felt a terrifying suppressive force bearing down on him from all directions. Strands of terrifying, ferocious, and violent aura appeared in the air, as if they could annihilate everything in their path. Sky Evolution Sacred Body, activate. At the moment of life and death, the corners of Nye Tian's mouth twitched. He let out a low roar, and the power of the stars erupted. At the same time, boundless heaven evolution sacred energy was released. The world rumbled, and the heaven evolution sacred body appeared once again. It stood tall in the air. You're just an ant and you want to resist me? At this moment, a deep roar resounded in the sky. It was akin to a clap of thunder, along with a terrifying aura that caused the surrounding space to tremble. In the blink of an eye, the gigantic palm shadow in the sky released a frightening power. Rays of gloomy light blossomed, bursting forth with an unstoppable force. Boom! The surging waves in the void surged in all directions, causing the surrounding crowd to retreat once again. Countless eyes trembled as their expressions turned sluggish. They couldn't imagine that a cultivator could unleash such terrifying power. Rumble! Boom, boom, boom! In the next moment, under the watchful eyes of countless pairs of eyes, the dark shadow of the palm suddenly fell. It was like an endless mountain, falling on the celestial evolution holy body. Suddenly, the void space shook, and the celestial evolution holy body directly collapsed, turning into an endless wild force that raged in the space. Boom! Instantly, Nye Tian felt a terrifying pressure, as if his body was about to be torn apart. This terrifying power was simply irresistible. Jiu Xian's supremacy was indeed worthy of being the leader of the 9 mystical sects, 5 great supremacies. Bang! Then, with a muffled sound, a bloody figure flew out, leaving a trail of blood in the air. It was Nye Tian. At this moment, he was unable to contend head-on with sovereign Jiu Xian. Good chance. At that moment, the 9 tribulations mystic master's eyes trembled and his killing intent surged. With a low roar, his figure instantly moved. He struck out with his palm and madly attacked Nye Tian. He sensed that Nye Tian's aura was still there, which meant that he was not dead. But he was very sure that if he followed up with another palm strike, Nye Tian would definitely die. Despicable scum! At the same time, a low, murderous voice rang out. Then, a sword shadow appeared in the void. It was vigorous and violent as it headed straight for the 9 tribulations mystic venerable. Huh! The 9 tribulations mystic venerable was stunned for a moment. He immediately turned around and saw that the person who attacked was Nye Fenghua. Ant, you're courting death. The 9 tribulations mystic venerable frowned and changed his target. His entire body's aura surged wildly as he struck out with his palm and attacked Nye Fenghua. Boom! In the void, a muffled explosion rang out. The sword's shadow in the air directly collapsed and Nie Fenghua's figure was instantly sent flying. Whoosh! At the same time, on the other side, there was a roar in the void. On Nie Tian's back, 1,000-meter-long astral soul wings spread out like clouds in the sky, suppressing the void and stabilizing his figure. Father! When he saw Nie Fenghua's figure flying backward from the impact, his eyes trembled and he cried out in fear. Just as Nie Fenghua's figure was about to fall to the ground, a figure whizzed by and caught him firmly. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as his figure flew over and landed beside Boundless Ghost. The person who caught Nie Fenghua just now was precisely Boundless Ghost Desolate. Father! When Nie Tian saw that Nie Fenghua was unconscious and his aura was weak, he could not help but tremble. His face was so gloomy that it looked like it was about to drip blood. It was extremely terrifying. That moment just now was indeed a moment of life and death. If Nie Fenghua had not stopped the 9 Tribulations Mystic Venerable, Nie Tian's fate would have been certain death. Now, Nie Tian had taken a direct hit from the 9 Tribulations Mystic Venerable. He was severely injured and his face was as white as a sheet. However, compared to him, Nie Fenghua's situation was even more serious. Without hesitation, Nie Tian forcibly released the power of the Terra Vein source and channeled it into Nie Fenghua's body. However, his vitality was severely depleted and he could only barely stabilize Nie Fenghua's aura. Brat, you actually didn't die after taking a direct hit from this venerable. At that moment, a deep and powerful voice came from the void. A black-robed figure stood coldly in the void, his eyes as sharp as blades as they locked onto Nie Tian. That black-robed figure was the head of the 9 Profound Sect's 5 sovereigns, the 9 Profound Emperor. Empyrean Venerate Jiu Xian's figure stood in the void like a huge mountain, causing the surrounding void to tremble. His gaze was as deep as an abyss, filled with extreme indifference. But at this moment, there was an unconcealable trace of shock in his eyes. He was very surprised that Nie Tian hadn't died from the palm strike just now. That palm of his could destroy a mountain range, so one could imagine how powerful it was. However, Nie Tian was caught off guard and managed to take his palm head-on. So how could he not be surprised? Do you think that you're strong? Nie Tian turned around and looked at the 9 Profound Emperor with terrifying killing intent in his eyes. His voice was cold. The 9 Profound Emperor's strength was indeed stronger than the 9 Tribulations Mystic Venerable and the Heavenly Evil Monarch, but it was only by a little. At this moment, the 9 Profound Emperor might not be Nie Tian's opponent if he was in his peak state. The 9 Profound Emperor's gaze sank with an unsightly expression. He was actually being looked down upon by Nie Tian. In the Myriad region, Nie Tian was the first person that dared to look down on him. Brat, Earth Supremacy will give you a chance to live. If you can take another palm from Earth Supremacy, you and your friend can live, Emperor Jiuquan said coldly and domineeringly. The killing intent in his eyes was very obvious. Knitting his brows, Nie Tian's face was unsightly. In his current state, he couldn't take a palm from the 9 Profound Emperor unless he activated the demonic god physique. But with his current martial physique, he might suffer a backlash if he activated the demonic god physique. Brat, you don't have the right to choose. You can only accept it. Looking at Nie Tian, Divine Monarch Jiuquan said in a deep voice, being killed by me with a single palm strike is your fate. What qualifications do you have to arrange my fate? Nie Tian squinted his eyes as he coldly replied, isn't it just a palm? Come. You have guts. Looking at Nie Tian, a cold smile rose on the corner of the 9 Profound Emperor's lip. He seemed to be enjoying Nie Tian's struggle. This emperor likes to kill people with guts. QL 11. Chapter 3306. Unity of Man and Earth. Nie Tian. When Desolate Ghost Boundless saw that Nie Tian was really going to fight with Emperor Jiu Xian, he could not help but exclaim. At this time, Nie Tian had consumed too much energy. Most importantly, He had lost too much blood and his martial body was about to reach its limit. How could Nye Tian fight with Emperor Jiu Xian in this state? Kid, I have seen countless geniuses, but this is the first time I have seen someone like you. If you were not standing on the opposite side of me, I would have accepted you as my disciple. But now, unfortunately, you can only die, Emperor Jiu Xian said cold as he looked at Nye Tian with a strange light in his eyes. Nye Tian was only an 8th stage pseudo-sage, but he had seriously injured 2 supremes of the 9 mysteries sect. Such combat strength was shocking. Emperor Jiu Xian would never allow such a person to live. Nye Tian laughed coldly, disdain filling his face as he said, "Scum like you wouldn't accept me as your master even if you wanted to." When Emperor Jiu Xian heard Nye Tian's words, his face suddenly sank and his eyes became extremely cold. He said coldly, "I didn't expect you to be so talented and arrogant. Make your move." Nye Tian's eyes were gloomy as he said cold, "I will send you on your way with 1 palm." Emperor Jiu Xian responded coldly. His whole body's aura skyrocketed in an instant, and a terrifying wave of air rushed out. Suddenly, the void trembled as if the world was about to collapse. In the next moment, Emperor Jiu Xian slapped down with a ferocious palm. It was extremely terrifying, and it directly pressed down on the void with a roar. Countless spacetime cracks appeared in the surroundings, and the world seemed to be forcibly split at this moment. An incomparably powerful force fell down and pressed down on Nye Tian. Too terrifying! The people in the distance could feel the surging impact from the void, and their eyes could not help but tremble as they exclaimed. The power displayed by Emperor Venerate Jiu Xian was so strong that even heaven and earth couldn't bear it. With such a terrifying palm strike, Emperor Venerable Jiu Xian clearly intended to kill Nye Tian with a single blow. At this time, Nye Tian stood high up in the sky. Feeling the pressure from above, he closed his eyes. He seemed to have entered a mysterious realm. His divine sense had arrived in a strange space. The Trinity Holy Array. At this moment, he had entered the space of the tri-element sacred formation. He wanted to seek a breakthrough in his sword principle at this moment of life and death. This was a moment of life and death. Not only would Nye Tian's life be decided, but also Nye Fenghua, Jun Aoqing, Desolate Ghost, and even Sher Rui Qianyu, Fat Cat, and the Ghost Emperor of the 9 Superbs. So in this battle, Nye Tian absolutely could not lose. He had to receive this palm strike. Stretching your neck to die? Seeing that Nye Tian had closed his eyes, Emperor Jiu Xian couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth into a disdainful smile. He said coldly, "I thought you had a lot of backbone. It turns out that you're just going to die." Nye Tian's performance at this time made Emperor Jiu Xian feel that he was waiting for death. He had already given up. The crowd looked at Nye Tian with a somewhat complicated expression. This kid is so talented, but he still has to give up in the face of Emperor Jiu Xian. What's the use of talent? He's already an arrow at the end of its flight. There's no way he can resist. Accepting death calmly at this time can be considered a moving and tragic act. Alas! Sure enough, no matter how strong a person's willpower is, when faced with an opponent who far surpasses them, their mentality will collapse. Everyone said, obviously thinking that Nye Tian had given up resisting. However, was the truth really as they said? Of course not. Boom! High up in the sky, Nye Tian suddenly opened his eyes, his whole body releasing a terrifying sword momentum. A violent, murderous sword intent rolled out, and at the same time, it surged with a bloody aura. He, Nye Tian, was not someone who would give up so easily. At this moment, he released all his sword intent, and at the same time, he burned his blood and qi, stimulating his sword intent to the extreme. And this time, there was an obvious change in his sword intent aura, almost a qualitative improvement. How is this possible? In the distance, Desolate Ghost Boundless Ghost looked at Nye Tian, his eyes trembling in shock, not daring to believe his eyes. He was a spear user, and he also had a keen perception of the aura of sword intent. He sensed that Nye Tian's sword Dao realm had actually reached the ultimate divine sword body realm. How was this possible? Nye Tian was originally only at the ultimate divine sword soul realm. How could he break through to the ultimate divine sword body realm in an instant? Even if Nye Tian had comprehended something, it was impossible for him to improve his sword Dao realm. Sword intent was a continuous process of accumulation, and it was not something that could be improved just by comprehending it. Celestial Evolution Sacred Power. He integrated the Celestial Evolution Sacred Power into his sword intent and forcefully increased his sword Dao realm. At this moment, Nye Fenghua actually woke up and spoke with a trembling voice. There was a burning passion in his eyes that could not be concealed. Nye Tian was simply a genius, a demon, and a monster. At this time, he could actually think of such a way to improve his sword intent. Nye Tian integrated the Celestial Evolution Sacred Power into his sword intent, just like how Nye Fenghua activated the sword seal in his body, forcefully increasing his sword Dao realm. To Nye Tian, the Celestial Evolution Sacred Power was like the Yuan Explosion Pill. However, the Yuan Explosion Pill increased his martial Dao realm, while the Celestial Evolution Sacred Power increased his sword Dao realm. Empyrean Venerable Jiu Xian felt the aura around Nye Tian's body, and his eyes slightly froze. He could not help but exclaim in surprise, and then a trace of horror appeared in his eyes. He never thought that Nye Tian would be able to do such a shocking thing at the moment of life and death. Sacred heaven-defying sword, earth and human unification, stars and moons sync. It was at this moment that Nye Tian opened his mouth. His deep voice reverberated in the air, as sharp as a blade and as forceful as a clap of thunder. Each and every word he uttered was filled with a threatening, killing intent. Boom! In the next moment, Nye Tian struck out with the star's heaven slash in his hand. The void trembled and the space collapsed. A blood-colored sword shadow that was tens of thousands of meters long appeared, like an ancient giant beast that opened its bloody mouth to devour everything. At this moment, everyone's eyes and mouths were wide open, but they were so shocked that they could not say a word. No words could express the shock in their hearts. The power that Nye Tian's sword had exploded with could devour the heavens and split the earth. Human unification, stars and moons sync. This sword was a new sword technique that Nye Tian had comprehended in the tripartite holy formation. The so-called human unification was to merge the stars slash with the earth sword and the moon swallow with the earth sword into an even stronger sword technique. The human unification, coupled with the celestial evolution sacred power and the divine sword will of the ultimate sword body, the power of this sword was beyond imagination. Boom! Boom! In the void, the palm's shadow was like a mountain, and the sword's shadow was like a beast. Two extremely terrifying forces tore through the void, and the violent aura was endless. Rumble! Crack, crack, crack! In the next instant, the two extremely powerful forces collided with each other, and there was a terrifying explosion in the void. Waves of terrifying forces spread out, and the space and time instantly collapsed. Chapter 3307. Chapter 3302. Chapter 3302. Bizarre death-terrifying noises constantly resounded in the sky as if the heavens and earth were exploding. Boundless waves swept through space like a ferocious beast that devoured and annihilated everything. The crowd was completely dumbfounded by the scene before them. They could not believe their eyes. This level of battle had far exceeded their understanding of the martial Tao. They couldn't imagine that this battle would be so terrifying. That was especially true of Nye Tian, who, in a desperate situation, burst forth with shocking power. Boom! 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 After a long time, a series of ear-piercing explosions rang out. The terrifying palm image in the sky actually collapsed, turning into endless waves that swept in all directions. Boom! At this moment, the Jiu Xian overlord felt a terrifying force rushing towards him. Immediately after, the space around him was filled with a terrifying strangling force, locking his entire body in place. In the next moment, a horrifying and bloody scene occurred. PFFF, PFFF, PFFF. Countless bloody wounds appeared on Supremacy Joshuan's body, turning him into a bloody man in an instant. Damn it! This sudden scene caused Jiu Xian's expression to turn extremely ugly. He let out a low roar and released a terrifying aura from his body. He forcefully broke free from the strangling shackles and retreated in a frenzy. On the other side, Nie Tian's figure also retreated madly, rushing out of the turbulent void. When everyone saw Nie Tian and Emperor Jiu Xian's silhouettes, their eyes violently trembled. Especially Emperor Jiu Xian, who was covered in blood. It was too shocking. Without a doubt, Emperor Jiu Xian had lost in this confrontation. The arrogant Emperor Jiu Xian boasted that he could kill Nie Tian with a single palm, but not only did he fail to kill Nie Tian, he even suffered heavy injuries. Emperor! The Nine Tribulations' sovereign and heavenly evil monarch exclaimed as they looked at Emperor Jiu Xian. They couldn't believe their eyes. The head of the Nine Profound Sect's 5 sovereigns, Emperor Jiu Xian, was actually heavily injured by Nie Tian? Was this really not an illusion? How could Nie Tian be so powerful? The Nine Tribulations' sovereign and heavenly evil monarch had never seen Emperor Jiu Xian in such a pathetic state. Even back then, when Emperor Jiu Xian fought eternally merciless, he was only slightly inferior. But right now, Nie Tian's sword had practically suppressed Emperor Jiu Xian. How is this possible? At this time, Sovereign Joshuan's eyes were trembling as he looked at Nie Tian with incomparable shock. He no longer had the arrogance he had before. Instead, even his voice was slightly trembling, filled with deep fear. Emperor Jiu Xian, this is your strength? This is the fate that you've arranged for me? Nie Tianling sneered with cold, killing intent flickering in his eyes. Every single word was akin to a slap on Emperor Jiu Xian's face. His face sank, and just when he wanted to speak, he vomited a mouthful of blood. His silhouette took several steps back, and he nearly lost his balance. There was a massive amount of sword intent pouring into his body, and he couldn't suppress it any longer. Emperor! The Nine Tribulations' sovereign and heavenly evil monarch immediately took a step forth to support Emperor Jiu Xian. This was the first time that the 3 sovereigns of the Nine Profound Sect were heavily injured by the same person. Emperor Jiu Xian, what else do you have to say? Nie Tianling smiled as he took a step forth. Boy, you've won a chance for yourself to live, you. Imperial Venerable Jiu Xian took a deep breath and spoke in a low voice, but his face suddenly stiffened, and his expression became extremely pained. When Nie Tian saw this scene, he squinted his eyes and his face changed. He could sense that the aura within Emperor Jiu Xian's body had suddenly become unstable. Emperor, are you all right? The Nine Tribulations' sovereign and heavenly evil monarchs' faces changed as they nervously asked. Boom! Emperor Jiu Xian opened his mouth with a sinister expression. He couldn't even speak before his body suddenly exploded and turned into a crimson radiance. The Nine Tribulations' sovereign and heavenly evil monarch stood beside Emperor Jiu Xian with their faces covered in blood. The 2 of them were frozen on the spot and couldn't speak a word. Emperor Jiu Xian, the supreme powerhouse of the Nine Profound Sect, the leader of the 5 sovereigns, died. The sudden scene caused everyone to be stunned. They were dumbfounded and were unable to react for a long time. Nie Tian was also stunned by the scene before him, and a puzzled look appeared on his face. His sword strike just now had indeed injured the 9 mystic Tharch, but it was far from being fatal. Empyrean Venerable Jiu Xian's aura suddenly became berserk, and then it exploded. What's going on? Nie Tian couldn't figure it out. Emperor Jiu Xian is dead. After a long time, the 9 tribulations sovereign and heavenly evil monarch finally recovered from their shock, and their eyes trembled. At this moment they still couldn't accept the truth. The fact that divine monarch 9 mysteries had been killed by Nyetian with a single sword strike was simply unbelievable. Heavenly evil monarch, let Jun Aoqing go, and I'll let you guys leave. Nyetian's voice resounded as he looked at the heavenly evil monarch with a cold gaze. Emperor Jiu Xian's death was too bizarre, which was something that Nyetian never expected. But it was definitely a good thing for him. The heavenly evil monarch's face was unsightly as he looked at the 9 tribulations sovereign. The 9 tribulations sovereign could still be considered calm as his cold gaze wandered around Nyetian. Brat, that sword from before must have exhausted all of your energy, right? We don't want to fight anymore, so why don't we make a deal? You give us the item in the coffin, and we'll return the Netherworld princess to you. What do you think? The 9 tribulations sovereign could tell that although Nyetian looked ferocious on the surface, his aura was much weaker than before. Furthermore, with Nyetian's strength, he wouldn't let them go so easily if he really had the strength. This undoubtedly meant that Nyetian couldn't hold on any longer, and he was just holding on. However, he wasn't certain about this. Furthermore, Nyetian's strength was too bizarre, and if they made a move, Nyetian might unleash another terrifying attack. Hence, the 9 tribulations sovereign chose the safest method, which was to exchange Jun Aoqing for the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin. Nyetian's gaze was dark as he nodded his head. The 9 tribulations sovereign's guess was right. He had already reached his limit, and he was only holding on with a single breath. If the 9 tribulations sovereign didn't die, then the situation would be unfavorable. Okay. The 9 tribulations sovereign acknowledged and glanced at the heavenly evil monarch before he flew towards the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin. He came to the top of the Emperor's coffin and looked inside. What he saw made his face stiffen and he was stunned. Seeing that the 9 tribulations sovereign was stunned, Nyetian couldn't help knitting his brows. He exclaimed in shock before he arrived beside the coffin. Chapter 3308. 2 Idiots Empty. Nyetian's eyes weren't deceiving him. The Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin was empty. There was nothing inside. Who would have thought that the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin was empty? This is impossible. This is impossible. After a long time, the 9 tribulations mystic Venerate finally reacted. He let out a shrill, and ear-piercing scream. He had tried his best to use Kuyo Oneguchi and the others to open the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin, but the coffin was empty. How could he accept this? Sovereign, what's going on? The heavenly evil monarch, who was waiting by the side, shouted when he saw the 9 tribulations sovereign going crazy. He wanted to know what was going on, but he did not dare to approach. Nyetian also went blank for a while, his eyebrows furrowed deeply. 9 tribulations sovereign, you've seen it. There's nothing in the Emperor's coffin. Let her go now. Nyetian looked at the 9 tribulations sovereign and said cold. Nyetian was also surprised that there was nothing in the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin. However, he did not care about that. Saving Jun Aoqing was the most important thing. The 9 tribulations sovereign was stunned. He looked at Nyetian and suddenly shouted, Brat, it must be your doing. You took the thing in the Emperor's coffin. I took it? Nye Tianling smiled and said, From the moment the Emperor's coffin appeared to the moment it opened, I did not even get close. How could I have the opportunity to take the thing in the coffin? If you want to go back on your word, then let's fight. The 9 tribulations sovereign's face froze and he was speechless. Nye Tian was right. He did not get close to the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin. Among everyone present, the Ghost Valley's 7 disasters were the only ones who got close to the coffin. However, the Ghost Valley's 7 disasters were killed by the Saint Corpse's ominous energy. Could it be that the thing in the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin was the Saint Corpse's ominous energy? Why was there no saint corpse in the coffin? The Nine Tribulations sovereign's eyes trembled. He could not accept this fact. Could it be that he had meticulously planned for such a long time just for a lump of divine corpse baleful chi? Xian Zun, what's wrong? The heavenly evil monarch couldn't help hollering from the side. Of course, he had heard the conversation between Nye Tian and the Nine Tribulations mystic venerate. However, he would not give up until he saw the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin with his own eyes. Come and see for yourself, the Nine Tribulation mystic sovereign roared before he appeared beside the heavenly evil monarch to help the latter look after Jun Aoqing. Glancing at Nye Tian, the heavenly evil monarch's eyes trembled. Evidently, he was somewhat afraid. But after a brief pondering, he still flew towards the coffin. Jun Aoqing was still in their hands. Even if Nye Tian had the strength to kill him, he wouldn't dare to do so. But when the heavenly evil monarch saw the Ghost Valley's emperor's coffin, his face froze and he became speechless. His face was unsightly. Although he was mentally prepared, it was still hard to accept when he saw the empty coffin of the Ghost Valley Emperor. They had put in so much effort and paid such a huge price, but there was nothing in the Ghost Valley's Emperor's coffin. How could he accept this? Heavenly evil monarch, you've already seen it. Let her go. Nye Tian did not give the heavenly evil monarch too much time and said with a cold flicker in his eyes. The heavenly evil monarch's face was unsightly, but he was still unwilling to give up. His divine sense swept across the coffin, but he couldn't find anything. Nye Tian, we're gentlemen, so don't play any tricks. The heavenly evil monarch retreated as he looked at Nye Tian. Release her. Nye Tian coldly said as he stared at the heavenly evil monarch with killing intent. Okay. The heavenly evil monarch returned to the Nine Tribulations mystic venerate and nodded his head. After a brief hesitation, the Nine Tribulations mystic venerate released Jun Aoqing. Nye Tian. The moment Jun Aoqing broke free, her silhouette flickered and appeared beside Nye Tian. She threw herself into the latter's embrace with tears rolling down her cheeks. It's fine now. Nye Tian comforted Jun Aoqing, but his eyes were fixed on the Nine Tribulations mystic venerate and the heavenly evil monarch. At this moment, the two of them had already retreated tens of thousands of meters away. However, the two of them did not leave, but looked at Nye Tian as well. Nye Tian, you killed the 9 mystic emperor of our 9 profound sect, and the 9 profound sect will not let you off. The heavenly evil monarch looked at Nye Tian from afar with a cold smile. Nye Tian, our 9 profound sect will not live under the same sky as you. The 9 Tribulations mystic venerate threatened with a murderous expression. 9 profound sect? Nye Tianling smiled as killing intent flickered in his eyes. It won't be long before I personally step into the 9 profound sect and annihilate your entire sect. Sensing Nye Tian's killing intent, the heavenly evil monarch and the 9 Tribulations mystic venerate's eyes trembled. They did not speak a word and turned into 2 streaks of light as they disappeared into the horizon. The 3 sovereigns of the 9 profound sect came to the Saint Soul Academy at the same time, but this was the outcome. Everyone looked in the direction that the heavenly evil monarch and the 9 profound sect disappeared with complicated gazes. Soon, their gazes shifted to Nye Tian with unconcealable shock and fear in their eyes. The strength that Nye Tian had displayed had far exceeded their understanding. At this moment, Nye Tian suddenly turned around and swept his gaze across everyone as he barked, "Get lost!" His voice wasn't loud, but it was like a clap of thunder in the ears of everyone present. Everyone felt their souls tremble. This was the spirit of an expert, the deterrence of an expert. If Nye Tian was just an ordinary 8th order pseudo-martial sage, he would definitely be mocked by everyone for his roar. In the next moment, everyone reacted and moved. In the blink of an eye, all the figures disappeared without a trace. Aside from Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing, only Nye Fenghua and Desolate Ghost were left. Jun Aoqing had calmed down by now. When she saw Nie Tian's pale face, she couldn't help asking nervously, Nie Tian, are you all right? I'm not. Nie Tian's eyes flickered. He wanted to hold on, but before he could finish his sentence, he vomited a mouthful of blood. Nie Tian. June Ouching immediately supported Nie Tian as her eyes flickered with unease. Taking a deep breath, Nie Tian consumed a few divine elixirs, but his face was still as pale as a sheet. His injuries were too severe. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let the 9 tribulation mystic sovereign and heavenly evil monarch leave so easily. Merging the celestial evolution sacred power with the demonic god's sword intent to forcefully raise his sword Dao realm was a huge blow to Nie Tian's martial physique. At this moment, most of the meridians in his body were in a ruptured state. Even if he had the power of the stars and the sovereign dragon vein, it would still take him a few days to recover. Nie Tian took a few deep breaths to stabilize his aura. Right now, what he needed the most was rest. Ah, 2 idiots. But at this moment, the Ghost Emperor suddenly let out a weird cry and burst into laughter. Nie Tian was stunned. He had no idea why the Ghost Emperor was laughing. What mystic sovereign or evil sovereign? They're all idiots. The Ghost Emperor laughed as if he had been holding it in for a long time. His eyes were filled with unconcealable excitement as he said, "The Ghost Valley's Emperor's coffin is such a good thing, but you actually don't want it? What a retard." "Ghost Emperor, did you find something in the Ghost Valley's Emperor's coffin?" Nie Tian couldn't help asking with his brows knitted. The Ghost Emperor calmed down and chuckled. "Do I need to find anything? The Ghost Valley's Emperor's coffin itself is the best thing." Chapter 3309. The Ghost Valley's Emperor's Coffin. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. It looked like the 9th Order evil sovereign and heavenly evil monarch missed out on something good. "Ghost Emperor, what's the secret in the Ghost Valley's Emperor's coffin?" A brief moment later, Nie Tian became cold and couldn't help asking. The Ghost Emperor smiled. "The material of the Ghost Valley's Emperor's coffin is special. It's the legendary Wood of Fortune." Wood of Fortune. Nie Tian's eyes trembled when he heard this name. The Ghost Emperor heavily nodded his head. The Wood of Fortune comes from the Tree of Fortune, which is one of the 5 legendary sacred trees. The Wood of Fortune contains a profound power of fortune, and it's rumored that it can even give birth to life. But rumors are just rumors, and they can't be taken seriously. In any case, this emperor has never seen any life being born from the power of fortune. But the power of fortune has the ability to perfectly store a cultivator's blood energy. Many experts would use the coffin of fortune to preserve their martial physique after they fall. But it's a pity that the power of fortune can also absorb the cultivator's blood energy. The reason why the Ghost Valley's Emperor's coffin is empty is because the corpse in the coffin was absorbed by the Wood of Fortune. After hearing the Ghost Emperor's words, Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble. He said, "You're saying that the Emperor's coffin originally contained a saint's corpse, but its power was absorbed by the coffin?" "That's right." The Ghost Emperor heavily nodded his head. Blood energy is the essence of a cultivator's power. It's formed from the accumulated blood energy of a cultivator after their death, and it contains great power. "I understand now." Nie Tian's eyes trembled. The Emperor's coffin is filled with blood energy. That also means that this Emperor's coffin contains the full power of a Saint Realm cultivator. QL11. The Ghost Emperor's eyes flickered for a while, but he smiled and said, "Nie Tian, the original owner of the Emperor's coffin, was not an ordinary Saint Realm warrior. I guess that he was the ancestor of the Ghost Valley clan. Furthermore, there shouldn't be just one person in the coffin, but 2 corpses." Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed as he went blank for a moment. "Why? It's simple. There are 2 divine evolution souls in the Emperor's steel. Of course, there are 2 Sage Realm warriors." The Ghost Emperor laughed strangely and said, Do you think a Sage Realm martial artist will produce 2 divine evolution souls after his death? Nie Tian's face darkened, unable to say anything. The Emperor's coffin contained the power of 2 super powerful Sage Realm warriors. It was truly terrifying. However, he still had some doubts in his heart. He could not help but ask, Ghost Monarch, if the coffin contains such a powerful force, why can't I sense it at all? Furthermore, the 9 tribulation profound sovereign and heavenly evil monarch did not sense it? Humph! The Ghost Monarch chuckled in disdain. The Tree of Fortune can conceal any aura. Not to mention you guys, even I can't sense it. This. Nie Tian's face sank as he was left speechless. Then how did you know? This Emperor guessed it. The Ghost Monarch replied before Nie Tian could finish his words. Guessed it? Nie Tian let out a weird cry as the corner of his lips twitched. The Ghost Monarch actually used a guess on this matter? Furthermore, he even said it in such a serious manner, which left Nie Tian speechless. Brat, do you not trust me? The Ghost Monarch knitted his brows as he curled his lips. Although I can't sense the aura in the coffin, I can still recognize the Tree of Fortune. Take a closer look and see if there are any fine crimson patterns on the coffin. Nie Tian knitted his brows as he immediately looked over. Sure enough, he saw dense crimson patterns on the coffin. Those crimson patterns were too small and dense. Looking closely, they looked like the growth rings of a tree. However, the crimson color was glaring, as if it had been soaked in blood. The Tree of Fortune was black in color, which perfectly covered the crimson color. This was also the reason why Nie Tian did not notice those crimson patterns. Humph, that's the bloodline circuit. The Ghost Monarch smiled as he continued, only the blood of the strongest cultivator can leave a bloodline circuit on the Tree of Fortune. Nie Tian heavily nodded his head as he believed the Ghost Monarch's words. However, he knitted his brows in the next moment and asked, What's the use of so much energy in the coffin? What's the use? The Ghost Monarch yelled when he heard Nie Tian's words. If he wasn't in his soul form, he would definitely vomit a mouthful of blood from the anger. Nie Tian actually asked what the use of the coffin that contained the blood of 2 top-tiered powerhouses was? Little Nie, let me put it this way. If you enter the coffin now, you can definitely break through to the Sage Realm in 10 years at most. The Ghost Monarch's lips twitched as he said in a deep voice. 10 years to break through to the Sage Realm? Isn't that a little slow? Nie Tian frowned and murmured. You! The Ghost Monarch's face stiffened. He was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. 10 years to break through to the Sage Realm? How could Nie Tian say that it was slow? Even in the sacred world, it was rare for a cultivator to break through to the Sage Realm from the rank 9 Pseudo-Sage Realm in 10 years. However, breaking through to the Saint Realm in just 10 years was simply a miracle, a myth, in the Realmverse under such a huge world restriction. However, Nie Tian actually felt that it was too slow. How could the Ghost Monarch not be angry? However, this was to be expected. After all, Nie Tian's speed of improvement was too fast. It made the Ghost Monarch feel that 10 years was too long. In any case, I won't lie in this coffin, Nie Tian said with a faint smile when he saw the Ghost Monarch's reaction. He could break through to the Sage Realm with his own ability. He didn't need the coffin's help. You can't lie down even if you want to. The Ghost Monarch laughed and said, Wouldn't it be a waste for you to use such a good thing? You're not a member of the Giga clan. How much blood energy can you absorb in the coffin? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed after hearing the Ghost Monarch's words. He said, You're saying that the most suitable person to cultivate in the coffin is Jing Yue? Of course. The Ghost Monarch's eyes trembled. His expression became more solemn as he said, That little girl is from the Giga clan. She has the bloodline power of the Giga clan in her body. It resonates with the blood energy in the coffin. It's the most cost-effective way for her to absorb the power of the coffin. If she's allowed to cultivate in the coffin, she will only need a year to break through to the Sage Realm. A year to break through to the Sage Realm. Nie Tian was startled by the ghost monarch's words. His face changed and he was dumbfounded. Jing Yue was only a demi-saint, but the Gigu Emperor's coffin could actually allow her to break through to the Sage Realm in a year? This was way too abnormal. The Gigu Emperor's coffin was too terrifying. If the 9 Tribulations Sovereign and the heavenly evil monarch were here and knew what they missed, they would probably die from anger. At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly thought of Jing Yue and his eyes trembled as he exclaimed, Jing Yue. Chapter 33:10. I want revenge. I wonder how Jing Yue is. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he immediately took out the 9 Extreme. He informed Nie Fenghua, Jun Aoqing and the others and immediately entered the 9 Extreme. Nie Tian. In the 9 Extreme, Hua Iru saw Nie Tian appear and immediately walked over, but his face was a little uneasy. Elder Hua, is Jing Yue all right? Nie Tian went forward and saw that Jing Yue was still in the formation, fusing with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit. However, her face was very ugly and as pale as paper. Her whole body was covered in cold sweat that soaked her clothes. Her condition is not very good. The fusion with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit is not going well. She has consumed a lot of blood qi before, and now her blood qi is insufficient, causing her aura to be very unstable. Hua Iru looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, Yes. Nie Tian nodded with an ugly expression. Nie Tian, you can't help her now. Whether or not she can successfully fuse with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit depends on whether her will is strong enough. Hua Iru looked at Nie Tian and said with a gloomy face, That's not necessarily true. If she is in the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin, she can easily fuse with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit with the help of the Blood Yuan power in the coffin. At this time, the Ghost Emperor's voice sounded and said to Nie Tian, Let Jing Yue enter the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin to cultivate now? Nie Tian frowned and couldn't help but be surprised. Yes. The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, The Blood Yuan power in the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit and the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin come from the same warrior. When fusing with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit, it will be more beneficial to absorb the Blood Yuan power in the coffin. Alright. Nie Tian's eyes flickered. After agreeing, he directly left the 9 Extreme and put the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin into the 9 Extreme. Nie Tian, what is this? Hua Iru saw the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin and asked in surprise. Ghost Valley Emperor coffin. Nie Tian smiled faintly and briefly explained the origin of the Emperor coffin. So in the Emperor tablet, other than the Sky Evolution Saint Soul, there is also the Ghost Valley Emperor coffin. After listening to Nie Tian's words, Hua Iru could not help but tremble as he said with a shocked expression. Then, without hesitation, Nie Tian placed Jing Yue and the Great Formation around her into the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin. After that, he nervously sensed Jing Yue's aura, fearing that something might happen to her. Fortunately, after a while, Jing Yue's aura stabilized and her complexion began to improve. Her martial body returned to normal. Phew! Nie Tian let out a long breath of turbid air. His tensed face relaxed a lot. Nie Tian, thank you. At this time, a woman walked over. Her body was weak and frail. She bowed slightly towards Nie Tian. Auntie is too polite. This is what I should do. Of course, Nie Tian recognized that the woman in front of him was Jing Yue's mother, Ghost Valley Rumung. He quickly supported the latter and said with a faint smile. Ghost Valley Rumung nodded slightly and did not say anything else. If it was not for Nie Tian, she could not imagine what she and Jing Yue would have experienced today. Ghost Emperor, how long will it take for Jing Yue to fuse with the Sky Evolution Saint Soul? Nie Tian looked at Jing Yue in the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin and asked in a deep voice. It doesn't take too long to fuse with the Sky Evolution Saint Soul. The most important thing is that she needs to absorb the blood origin power in the Emperor's coffin. With her current martial body, while absorbing the blood origin power, Her martial body needs a slow acceptance process. The Ghost Emperor's eyes lit up as he said, "According to my guess, it will take her several years to dozens of years to completely absorb the blood origin power in the Emperor's coffin. So long." Nie Tian could not help but frown when he heard the Ghost Emperor's words. He did not expect that Jing Yu Wei would take so long to absorb the blood origin power in the Emperor's coffin. The Emperor's coffin contains the blood origin power of two Saint Pinnacle powerhouses. The Ghost Emperor's gaze sharpened as he said, "That little girl is merely a demi-saint, and the only reason she could absorb so much blood origin energy in such a short time was because she was a member of the Phantom Valley clan. If it were other martial artists, they would need hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years to absorb such a powerful blood origin power." The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched a little as he nodded. A few decades was indeed a little long for Nie Tian. However, for godly martial artists, a few decades was just a blink of an eye. It should be noted that many martial artists would go into seclusion for hundreds or even thousands of years. "Ghost Emperor, how powerful will Jing Yu Wei be after she absorbs the blood origin power?" Then, Nie Tian's eyes flashed with a hint of passion as he could not help but ask. "She will definitely be a saint. As for what realm of saint she will reach, I can't say for sure." The Ghost Emperor smiled and said, "Ghost Emperor, there are strong and weak saints. If that's the case, then the saint realm should also be divided into realms, right?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he suddenly asked. Although he had never been to the Holy Realm, he had seen more than one saint. Not long ago in the Tianqing realm, the Ghost Lord and the Lord of 10,000 Ghosts were clearly not saint martial artists of the same level. That was why Nie Tian guessed that there would be differences in strength even among saints, and that the saint realm should have different realms. Of course there are. The Ghost Emperor smiled but did not elaborate. But it's useless for you to know that now. It won't be too late to learn about it when you truly enter the Holy Realm. All right. Nie Tian's face stiffened and he could only nod. Knowing about the Saint Realm too early would not benefit him. He still had many unfinished business in the realms, and he would naturally go to the Holy Realm once he was done. He would definitely avenge Star Monarch Earth Destroyer Xiahou Yao. After making arrangements for Jing Yu Wei, Nie Tian and the rest left the Nine Extremities. Today's battle had ended with Kuyo Oniguchi's death, and the grudge between him and Nie Fenghua and Nie Tian had come to an end. However, another powerful force, the Nine Mystical Sect, was dragged into the limelight. Nie Tian had killed the Nine Mystical Sect's Emperor Jiu Xian, so the Nine Mystical Sect would definitely not let him off. Furthermore, Jun Aoqing had almost died in the hands of the heavenly evil monarch, so Nie Tian would definitely not let the Nine Mystical Sect off. It wouldn't be long before Nie Tian stepped into the Nine Mystical Sect and annihilated the Nine Mystical Sect. Nie Tian, I want revenge. At this moment, Jun Aoqing suddenly walked over with a chill in her eyes. Teacher was killed by them. I want revenge. Looking at Jun Aoqing, Nie Tian immediately reacted with killing intent surging in his eyes. Grandma Tang. When Jun Aoqing came to the Saint Soul Academy, she became the disciple of one of the three elders, Grandma Tang. But not long ago, Grandma Tang was killed by the Ghost Valley's 7 calamities to protect Jun Aoqing. Nie Tian, I want to increase my strength. I want to take revenge for my teacher and my clansmen. Jun Aoqing took a step forward and looked at Nie Tian with a burning gaze. Terrifying killing intent surged in her beautiful eyes. She might not have known Grandma Tang for long, but they had a master-disciple relationship. Furthermore, Grandma Tang died to protect her, so she had to take revenge for Grandma Tang. Furthermore, the Ghost Valley's 7 calamities even mentioned to her that the Netherworld Empire's destruction was planned by the heavenly evil monarch. The enmity between Jun Aoqing, the heavenly evil monarch, and the Nine Mystical Sect was irreconcilable. Chapter 33:11. Chapter 33:06. Battle in the Sky. Aoqing, Nie Tian looked at Jun Ouching. Sensing the hatred and killing intent in her eyes, he couldn't help but tremble. It was his negligence that led to Jun Ouching's capture and Granny Tang's tragic death. He blamed himself very much. Nie Tian, you can't be by my side all the time. I need to become stronger. Jun Ouching's eyes were filled with sharpness as she said in a deep voice. Nie Tian nodded. What Jun Ouching said was exactly what he was thinking. He had too many burdens on his shoulders. It would not be good to bring Jun Ouching with him all the time. Sometimes he could not even guarantee his own safety. How could he protect others? The only way to protect Jun Ouching was to make her stronger. Jun Ouching was only at the 9th stage half-sage realm. The gap between her and Nie Tian was getting bigger and bigger. Given Jun Ouching's age, she was already considered a monster to have such strength. However, the enemy she was facing was too strong. She had to become stronger quickly. Heaven and Earth Saint Rune. At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly thought of the Saint Origin Blood Jade. Not long ago, when he had been in the heavenly Xing realm, he had absorbed the power that had erupted from the awakening of the Heaven and Earth Saint veins, which had helped him unlock a saint pattern. Originally, he wanted to save this Heaven and Earth Saint rune for when he was breaking through to the Sage realm. But now it was more suitable to give it to Jun Ouching. With Jun Ouching's current strength, it should not take long for her to absorb the Heaven and Earth Saint rune. After absorbing the Heaven and Earth Saint rune, even if she could not directly break through to the Sage realm, she would at least reach the 9th stage Pseudo-Sage realm. Nie Tian, with Jun Ouching's current strength, directly fusing with the power of the Heaven and Earth Saint runes, will have a huge impact on her martial body. She will suffer a bit. The Ghost Emperor guessed what Nie Tian was going to do and said solemnly, "Any martial artist has to pay a price if they want to increase their strength. I believe that Jun Ouching can bear this kind of pain." Nie Tian's eyes flickered slightly, releasing a blazing light as he spoke in a heavy tone. "Yes." The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, "Right now, Jun Ouching's desire for revenge is very strong. It might not be a bad thing for her to fuse with the Saint Rune of Heaven and Earth." Nie Tian nodded and made his decision. He would let Jun Ouching merge with the Heaven and Earth Saint runes. Then, Nie Tian told Jun Ouching about the Heaven and Earth Saint runes. "For the sake of revenge, I can bear any pain." Jun Ouching nodded after listening to Nie Tian. Next, Nie Tian made some preparations and handed the sacred Origin Blood Jade to Jun Ouching. He let the latter enter the 9 extremities and start absorbing the Heaven and Earth Saint runes. Nie Tian didn't know how long it would take for Jun Ouching to finish fusing with the Heaven and Earth Saint runes, but Jun Ouching was temporarily safe in the 9 extremities. "Old Hua, what are your next plans?" At this time, Nie Tian looked at Hua Iru and sensed the aura in the latter's body. At this time, Hua Iru had already recovered a lot. His aura had stabilized and the wounds on his martial body had completely healed. After several transformations, the 9 extremities had gradually begun to transition into a sacred realm. It shouldn't be long before it became a true sacred realm. Hua Iru was able to recover so quickly because he had absorbed the power of the 9 extremities. "Nie Tian, this is all I can do for you at the moment. Next, I have an appointment to keep." Hua Iru looked at Nie Tian and smiled faintly. "An appointment?" Nie Tian was stunned. He wanted to ask Hua Iru what appointment he was going to keep. "Don't worry, we will meet again in the future." Hua Iru didn't want to say so much and just smiled. "Okay." Nie Tian nodded. He didn't want to ask anymore. Then, Hua Iru left with Gue Gu Rumring and quickly disappeared. Hua Iru first sent Gue Gu Rumring back to the Holy Moon Empire, and then went to keep the appointment. "Old Hua, the next time we meet, I won't let you down." Nie Tian looked in the direction where Hua Iru had disappeared. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly as he thought to himself. He had a feeling that the next time he saw Hua Iru would probably be after he entered the sacred realm. There should be some kind of connection between the Star Sacred Lord and the Star Envoy, so he was not worried that he would lose news of Huairu. Huairu's departure made Nie Tian feel slightly disappointed. Nie Tian, are you all right? At this moment, Nie Fenghua walked over and asked Nie Tian. Father, I'm fine. Nie Tian smiled faintly and nodded. Although he had been severely injured previously, he was gradually recovering at this moment. Pfft. However, at this moment, Nie Fenghua's body trembled and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Father! Seeing this, Nie Tian's expression changed and he hurriedly went up to support Nie Fenghua. I'm fine. This is the backlash after activating the sword seal. Nie Fenghua's face was pale as he said with a bitter smile. Nie Tian sensed the aura in Nie Fenghua's body and found that there was an extremely violent power in the latter's martial body. It was extremely terrifying. Father, what's going on with the sword seal in your body? Nie Tian asked with a frown. Nie Tian had already sensed that there was a powerful sword seal in Nie Fenghua's body. He had always thought that this sword seal was left behind by Eternally Merciless and was Nie Fenghua's trump card. However, after activating the sword seal, he discovered that the sword seal's aura was completely different from Eternally Merciless' sword intent. Without a doubt, this sword seal was not left behind by Eternally Merciless. Nie Tian felt that the sword seal in Nie Fenghua's body seemed to be even more powerful than Eternally Merciless' sword intent. He was very curious about where this sword seal came from. Nie Tian, this sword seal came from a powerful sword martial space. That world is called the Sky Sword Martial. Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, Clear Sky Sword Martial. When Nie Tian heard this strange name, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes, feeling a little strange. It sounded like a world of swords. As for what the Sky Sword Martial was, it was hard to guess. Sky Sword Martial is a world of its own. Eternally Merciless, me, and another swordsman, Bailey Xingxue, have all cultivated in that world. Nie Fenghua's eyes were gloomy as he said, It can be said that the three of us have such powerful achievements in the Sword Dao because of the Sky Sword Martial. Bailey Xingxue. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he heard this name. Bailey Xingxue and Eternally Merciless and Nie Fenghua knew each other. Turned out that the three of them had cultivated in the same world. At this time, Nie Tian was even more curious about this world called the Sky Sword Martial. Chapter 33:12. Chapter 33:07. Entering the Sky, I can go to the Sky Sword Martial Arts? Nie Tian looked at Nie Fenghua and asked in astonishment. He really wanted to go to the Sky Sword Martial Arts and see what the world that could make Eternally Merciless so terrifying was like. But he knew that the Sky Sword Martial Arts was not something that could be easily entered. Otherwise, that world would definitely be crowded by swordsmen. Nie Fenghua told him that Eternally Merciless said that the time for him to enter the Sky Sword Martial Arts had come. It sounded like Eternally Merciless had a very high status in the Sky Sword Martial Arts. Nie Tian, actually, Eternally Merciless wanted you to enter the Sky Sword Martial Arts a long time ago, but I kept stopping you. So, until now, you have not been able to enter the Sky Sword Martial Arts, Nie Fenghua said solemnly as she looked at Nie Tian. Why? Nie Tian was stunned. He was very confused. Why did Nie Fenghua want to stop him from entering the Sky Sword Martial Arts? Since the Sky Sword Martial Arts could produce swordsmen like Eternally Merciless, Nie Fenghua, and Bailey Xingxue, it should be a very good place to go. Why did she want to stop him? Could it be that the Sky Sword Martial Arts had some secrets? Nie Tian, the clear Sky Sword Martial technique, doesn't belong to the Myriad Realms. It's a mysterious world, and it's connected to more than just the Myriad Realms. Nie Fenghua frowned and said with a gloomy face, What do you mean? Nie Tian was stunned and couldn't help but feel puzzled. Domain system. This was the first time he had heard of this name. The so-called realm system is a system of realms that are connected together to form a realm system. For example, the myriad domains is a domain system. Nie Fenghua already knew that Nie Tian would be puzzled. She explained, generally speaking, there will be many domain systems under a sacred world, existing around the sacred world. It's like a realm. There are many planes of existence beneath it. So that's how it is. When Nie Tian heard Nie Fenghua's words, he couldn't help but be surprised. He had guessed that there might be more realms than just 10,000 realms. As it turned out, the myriad domain was only a system of domains, and there were many systems of domains like the myriad domain below the saint's world. The sword martial in the sky is not only connected to the myriad domains, but it is also connected to other domains and even some low-level sacred world. Therefore, after you enter the sky sword martial, you will not only encounter swordsmen from the myriad domain, but also swordsmen from other domains, and even some swordsmen from the sacred world, Nie Fenghua said solemnly. Father, are you worried that I won't be able to compete with these swordsmen, so you don't want me to enter the sky sword martial arts too early? Nie Tian asked with a faint smile. This is just one of the reasons. Nie Fenghua nodded, but his face became even gloomier. He said, there is another more important reason. Swordsmen who enter the sky sword martial are not allowed to leave easily. Unless your sword principle reaches the requirements of the Guardian of the Sky. Guardian of the Sky? When Nie Tian heard this name, he couldn't help but be stunned. He asked doubtfully, who is that? The Guardian of the Sky, as the name suggests, is the person who guards the sword martial in the sky. There are a total of 7 guardians in the sky sword martial, and Eternally Merciless is one of them. Nie Fenghua's eyes flickered, and he said, actually, Eternally Merciless' strength is far greater than what you see. Every time he enters the myriad domain, he will set up seals in his body to suppress the sword intent. This. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and his face was filled with astonishment. In his opinion, Eternally Merciless was already extremely terrifying, but he didn't expect that the real Eternally Merciless was even more terrifying. Eternally Merciless sealed his own sword intent, and it was obvious that he didn't want his strength to be too conspicuous. Father, what are the requirements of the Guardian of the Sky for swordsmen? What realm must the swordsmen reach before they are allowed to leave the sky sword martial arts? Nie Tian frowned and asked in a deep voice. He was worried about Mo Rushi, who was about to give birth soon, so he didn't have much time. If he had to spend a few years in the sky sword martial arts, he would rather not enter. Every Sky Guardian's requirements are different, but if you want to leave the sky sword martial arts, you must defeat one of the 6 great sky sword slaves. Nie Fenghua's eyes flickered with a peculiar light as he said, the 6 great sky sword slaves are second only to the Guardian of the Sky Sword Martial Arts. They are responsible for guarding the Sky Sword Martial Arts, and every swordsman who wants to leave the Sky Sword Martial Arts must obtain their permission. Father, when you left, you also defeated a sword slave in the sky, right? Nie Tian couldn't help asking when he saw the flickering in Nie Fenghua's eyes. No. Nie Fenghua shook his head and said, I have challenged the 6 great sword slaves countless times, but any one of them is far stronger than me. The few times I left the sky sword martial arts, it was because Eternally Merciless personally interceded with the sword slaves in the sky sword slaves that they let me leave. But every time I left, the sword slaves in the sky sword martial arts would leave a sword seal in my body to ensure my return. So the sword seal in Father's body was left by the sword slaves in the sky sword martial arts. Nie Tian knitted his brows. Nie Fenghua nodded his head and said, the most talented swordsmen from various domains are gathered in the sky sword martial arts. You should go and meet them. Furthermore, the sword seal in the sky will reappear in a month. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for any swordsman, so you should go. The sword seal in the sky. Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help burning with yearning. After pondering over it, he finally nodded his head. The sky sword martial arts was too attractive. Nie Tian planned to return from the sky sword martial arts in 3 months at most. Since Eternally Merciless let Nie Fenghua go, then he could also let Nie Tian go. Moreover, Bailey Xingshue's strength might not be above Nie Fenghua's, but didn't he also leave the sky sword martial arts? Following that, Nie Tian asked Boundless Ghost to head to the 9 Regions Wind and Cloud Alliance to look after the Nie family. Nie Tian was worried that the Dark Knight might harass the Wind and Cloud Alliance again. After Boundless Ghost Desolate agreed, he immediately left. Nie Fenghua and Nie Tian immediately headed to the Sky Sword martial art. 3 days later, Nie Fenghua and Nie Tian arrived at a place high up in the sky of the Sacred Spirit region. Dark clouds rolled in the surrounding space, and astral winds howled. A space-time crack appeared, and a huge pitch-black eye appeared in the void. Nie Tian, that space-time fissure is the Saint Soul region's entrance to the Clear Sky Sword martial technique. Nie Fenghua pointed at the space-time fissure and said. Then, her figure moved and she flew over. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't expect that this terrifying space-time crack was the entrance to the Sky Sword martial art. The 2 figures entered the space-time crack and disappeared. In the next moment, Nie Tian arrived at a strange world. The surrounding space was filled with an extremely strong aura of sword intent. It was incomparably sharp, and it made one's blood boil. Nie Tian's eyes burned with desire as he looked up into the sky. To his surprise, there was a gigantic sword floating in the air. It looked like an upside-down mountain peak that pierced into the heavens. It was over 10,000 meters long and gave off an ancient, boundless, vigorous, and desolate feeling. At this moment, in another place high up in the sky, 2 figures stood facing each other. It was obvious that they were going to fight. One of the figures made Nie Tian's eyes widen, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Nie Tian, do you know that person? Nie Fenghua couldn't help but frown when she saw Nie Tian's reaction. Yes. Nie Tian nodded his head heavily, and his eyes emitted a sharp light. He locked onto that figure and said, "He's my friend Emo Qianjun." Chapter 33:13. Limitless Sword Saint Emo Qianjun. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he stared at the figure in the sky. He couldn't believe that it was actually Emo Qianjun. Back when he had been in the god domain of the heaven world, Nie Tian, Emo Qianjun, the limitless sword saint, Jiu Qianxing, the sword monarch of the western domain, Ghost Scar, the sword ruler of the North Sea, and Duguanai, the evil swordsman of the East River, were known as the 5 strongest sword cultivators in the heaven world. Later on, all 5 of them had entered the realm. However, Duguanai had been killed by Nie Tian not long after entering the realm. QL11 after Gui Hen had entered the realm, Nie Tian had encountered him once, but there had been no news of him after that. Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing had briefly joined the Crimson Moon Divine Palace after entering the realm. Later on, the Crimson Moon Divine Palace's master, Qi Yefeng, had harbored ill intentions towards them, forcing them to leave the Divine Palace. Although it had been a long time, it was still vivid in his mind. However, the moment Nie Tian saw Emo Qianjun, he felt as though the blue sea had turned into mulberry field. Reuniting with an old friend felt like a lifetime had passed. No wonder there hadn't been any news of Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing after Nie Tian left. It turned out that Emo Qianjun had come to the Sky Sword Martial. Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing had left together, so they shouldn't have been separated. If Emo Qianjun was here, then Jiu Qianxing should be here too. Reuniting with a friend who had gone through life and death for so long made Nie Tian's heart tremble. He couldn't help but feel a surge of warmth as his eyes shone with a blazing light. Nie Tian, is that swordsman very important to you? Nie Fenghua couldn't help but ask when she saw Nie Tian's reaction. Yes. Nie Tian nodded. Back when I was in the realm, Emo Qianjun and I were sworn brothers. So that's how it is. Nie Fenghua nodded, but her eyes were clearly filled with worry. Father, let's go take a look. Nie Tian smiled faintly. His figure moved and flew towards the sky. Nie Fenghua hurriedly followed. Nie Tian and Nie Fenghua came to the crowd below and looked up at the two figures in the sky. Nie Tian's eyes naturally focused on Emo Qianjun. Feeling Emo Qianjun's aura, his eyes couldn't help but heat up, and he exclaimed in surprise. He could sense that Emo Qianjun's strength had already reached the 5th grade pseudo-sacred realm, and his mastery of the sword Dao had reached the ultimate godly sword flesh. Nie Tian was very surprised by his strength. Especially Emo Qianjun's sword Dao realm, it simply shocked Nie Tian. One had to know that Nie Tian's current sword Dao realm was only at the transcendent sword soul, which was even weaker than Emo Qianjun's. However, Nie Tian could use the power of the Sky Evolution Saint Soul to force his sword Dao realm to the transcendent sword body realm. It seemed that Emo Qianjun had come to the Sky Sword Martial a long time ago. Otherwise, his strength would not be so strong. As soon as Nie Tian came to the Sky Sword Martial, he felt that the space in this world was filled with a very strong aura of sword intent, which was especially suitable for swordsmen to cultivate. Therefore, it was not surprising that Emo Qianjun's sword Dao realm had reached the ultimate godly sword body realm. Emo Qianjun, you little swordfish, you actually dare to challenge this 100 swords? Are you tired of living? At this moment, the person opposing Emo Qianjun roared in an incomparably arrogant manner. Boom! As his voice fell, a terrifying aura erupted from his body, and rays of sword intent were released, like thousands of sharp blades striking the void, extremely sharp. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. This swordsman was very young, but his strength had reached the 9th grade pseudo-sacred realm, and his sword Dao realm had reached the ultimate godly sword body realm. The sword intent released from this person was extremely terrifying, like a ferocious wild beast. This person is so strong. Brother Mo is no match for him. Nie Tian's face darkened as his lips curled up coldly. He thought to himself, Brother Mo is a calm person who doesn't compete with others. Why did you challenge this person? Emo Qianjuan's character was relatively indifferent. There must be a reason why he challenged someone with such a great disparity in strength. Moreover, Nie Tian was very confused as to why the swordsman called Emo Qianjun a swordfish. Make your move. Emo Qianjun stood coldly in the void. His eyes were extremely firm, and at the same time, extremely sharp and murderous. Nie Tian was stunned again when he sensed Emo Qianjuan's murderous intent. He knew Emo Qianjun very well, and the latter was a very calm person. What did that person do to make Emo Qianjun so angry and murderous? At this moment, the crowd couldn't help but burst into laughter when they saw Emo Qianjun. This swordfish has been in the Sky Sword Martial for more than 10 years, but he's still a swordfish. What a piece of trash. Trash swordfish, how dare he challenge his own 100 swords? Isn't he courting death? It's just a swordfish. It doesn't matter if he dies. Anyway, who knows how many swordfish die in the Sky Sword Martial every day? The crowd discussed among themselves, and they looked at Emo Qianjun with undisguised contempt. Nie Tian couldn't help but look at Nie Fenghua when he heard the crowd's words. He transmitted his voice and asked, Father, what do they mean by swordfish and 100 swords? The swordsmen in the Sky Sword Martial are divided into 6 levels. Nie Fenghua frowned slightly and hesitated for a moment before he said, The weakest is the swordfish. From the weakest to the strongest, they are 10 swords, 100 swords, 1,000 swords, Wanjian, and Sky. Generally speaking, the 10 swords manage the swordfish, the 100 swords manage the 10 swords, the 1,000 swords manage the 100 swords, the Wanjian manages the 1,000 swords, and the Sky manages the Wanjian. The 6 sword slaves in the sky that I told you about are the 6 swordsmen in the Sky Sword Martial. They are the most powerful beings apart from the guardians of the sky. So that's how it is. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes as a cold light shone in them. It seemed that the Sky Sword Marshal was similar to the slave market. The so-called 100 Swords and 1,000 Swords were similar to the Centurions and Kiliarch. Moving from a swordfish to the Sky Sword Marshal was not only an upgrade in status, but also an upgrade in strength. Emo Qianjuan's identity as a swordfish meant that he was the weakest among the Sword Marshal in the Sky Sword Marshal. His opponent was 100 Swords, who was in the middle level. Given Emo Qianjuan's status and strength, challenging 100 Swords was like throwing an egg against a rock. But at this moment Emo Qianjun was very determined. His eyes were filled with killing intent, and his whole body was surging with a terrifying momentum. Great Heavenly Sword Seal. Seeing this, Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he was surprised. At this moment, Emo Qianjun had activated the Heavenly Sword Seal in his body. This is interesting. The 100 Swords felt that Emo Qianjuan's momentum had risen a lot. He could not help but narrow his eyes. After a moment of surprise, he revealed a playful smile and said, "I didn't expect a small fry like you to have some tricks up your sleeves. But this little bit of strength is still too weak to withstand a single blow from me." Buzz! As soon as he finished speaking, a strange-looking black longsword appeared in the hands of the 100 Swords cultivator. It looked like a long snake and let out a strange and mournful cry, filled with an eerie aura. Black Snake. He took out the mysterious snake devours the heavens. The surrounding crowd exclaimed in shock when they saw this. This 100 Swords had a nickname, Black Snake. Chapter 33:14. I've tried. Small fry, how dare you challenge the 100 Swords? You're courting death. In the sky, the 100 Swords, nicknamed the Black Snake, roared and made his move. The sword chi around his body was extremely violent as he attacked with the sky swallowing Black Snake. Boom! Suddenly, the void trembled and endless sword chi gathered. A giant black snake over 10,000 meters long appeared in the sky. It opened its abyss-like mouth and pounced at Emo Qianjun. What a powerful aura! As expected of the 100 Swords, as expected of the Black Snake. The crowd could not help but exclaim when they felt the aura of the Black Snake's attack. The aura of the Black Snake's attack was extremely violent, as if it was going to swallow the sky. Huh! Nie Fenghua's eyes narrowed as he exclaimed. Even he had to be careful when dealing with such a terrifying attack. Nie Tian's friend was only a rank 5 pseudo-holiness. Would he be able to withstand this attack? Nie Tian, on the other hand, looked even more nervous. His eyes glittered with a fierce light as he stared unblinkingly at Emo Qianjun. He was ready to strike at any time. He had rested for 3 days before entering the Blade Master Sky, so he had not fully recovered yet. However, he could not watch Emo Qianjun die. Great Sword of the Heavens, kill! At this moment, Emo Qianjun roared and the sword intent in his body surged to the extreme. The Yuan Spirit Sword, Limitless Great Heavens, appeared in his hand and slashed out. A sword shadow that was as majestic as a mountain appeared in the sky, and its violent momentum was not much weaker than that of the black giant snake. Huh! The crowd could not help but exclaim. They did not expect Emo Qianjun to be so powerful. Boom! In the next moment, the giant black snake collided with the majestic sword shadow. The void space shook, and the world seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Waves of violent sword will rushed out and were absorbed by the void space in an instant. It was very strange. The space of the Blade Master Sky was extremely strange. It had a strong absorption effect on sword chi. Therefore, it was difficult for the sword chi to spread out. Bang! A muffled sound was heard. Emo Qianjun and the black snake swayed at the same time. However, the black snake regained its balance after swaying for a while. Emo Qianjun, on the other hand, retreated several hundred meters. When he finally stabilized himself, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as paper. However, he still stood firmly on the spot. He suddenly raised his head, and a pair of resolute and murderous eyes stared fixedly at the black snake. Black Snake looked at Emo Qianjun. His face revealed surprise and shock instead of joy. He didn't expect that he wouldn't be able to kill Emo Qianjun with a single sword strike. How? That trash is still alive. The crowd cried out in surprise. It was hard to believe that a swordfish could survive a full-powered strike from 100 swordfish. Emo Qianjun's strength was beyond everyone's expectation. Again, Emo Qianjun roared. Like a wild beast, his whole body burst out with anger and killing intent. Huh! Nie Tian's expression became even more unsightly upon seeing this. What did the black snake do to make Emo Qianjun so angry? Emo Qianjun was no longer the calm Emo Qianjun that Nie Tian knew. Instead, he was a fiery Emo Qianjun. Trash, you're courting death. Black Serpent's eyes flashed with killing intent. With a loud roar, the mysterious snake devours the heavens, slashed through the air. A terrifying sword intent pierced through the sky, like a rainbow descending from the sky. After which, a terrifying black serpent appeared, its aura incomparably wild and terrifying. The black snake had 2 heads. Its chi was eerie, as if it was going to devour everything. The black snake is really angry. The crowd was shocked. This was the first time they had seen the black snake use a double-headed snake. The black snake was one of the 100 swords. It would be embarrassing if he could not kill a swordfish. After all, he was one of the 100 swords. Strength was very important to him. If he could not even kill Emo Qianjun, more and more people would challenge him. 1 sword. At this moment, Emo Qianjun showed no signs of fear. His eyes were filled with battle intent as blood gushed out from his body. At the same time, a terrifying aura of sword intent appeared and surrounded his body, causing the sword aura around him to rise to a terrifying level. Buzz! Boom! In the next moment, the infinite sword of great heavens slashed out. The sound of the sword was like the roar of a dragon and the roar of a tiger. Then, a shadow of a sword broke through the sky. This guy! The crowd's eyes trembled as they cried out in horror. Under such circumstances, Emo Qianjun was able to unleash an even more powerful attack. How terrifying! Boom, boom, boom! Then, the 2 forces collided. The space shook and the heavens and earth seemed to be on the verge of exploding. The sword chi wreaked havoc in the sky but disappeared quickly. Bang! Then, a muffled sound was heard. Emo Qianjun and the black snake retreated at the same time, leaving a trail of blood in the air. The crowd was shocked. Their gazes moved back and forth between the 2 figures. Black Snake's figure was pushed back 1,000 meters before he managed to stabilize himself. There was a bloody wound on his chest, but his aura was still extremely sharp. On the other hand, Emo Qianjun was like a kite with a broken string. He fell straight down to the ground. He's dead! The crowd exclaimed in shock. Emo Qianjun's strength was beyond their imagination, but he still failed to defeat the black snake. And the outcome of defeat was only one word: death. Boom! However, just when everyone was certain that Emo Qianjun was dead, the falling blood-red figure trembled for a moment before releasing a wave of sword intent. The figure strangely stood up and stabilized itself. That guy is still alive! Everyone simply didn't dare to believe their eyes, and they cried out in horror. Who would have thought that after such a terrifying battle, Emo Qianjun would still be alive? Emo Qianjun's body was covered in blood. His body was swaying. Only his eyes were still sharp and filled with unwillingness. Although he was not dead, he had lost. In the end, he was still no match for the black snake. Brother Jiu, I've tried my best. Emo Qianjun's eyes were trembling. His eyes were filled with tears. He did not fight for himself, but for Jiu Qianxing. However, he was too weak to defeat the black snake. Trash, go to hell! The black snake roared and pounced at Emo Qianjun like a ferocious beast. He swung the black snake heaven-devouring sword and the black snake reappeared, aiming for Emo Qianjun. Since he had defeated Mo Qianjun, there was no way he would let him live. Mo Qianjun stood still on the spot. He wanted to resist, but he no longer had the strength to do so. Chapter 33:15. Chapter 3:10. Who's the trash, what's going on? The sudden scene in the sky caused everyone's eyes to tremble as they cried out in alarm. No one had expected someone to intervene at Mo Qianjun's moment of life and death. Mo Qianjun had challenged the Black Serpent. This was a fair battle of life and death. Who would be so daring as to intervene? What was even more unexpected was that the person who intervened was extremely strong. With a single slash of his sword, he sliced the Black Serpent in half. Without a doubt, the person who intervened was definitely at the level of 100 swords, or even stronger. At this moment, Mo Qianjun looked at the sword that was whistling through the air, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. Of course, he could sense how familiar the aura of the sword intent in the sword was. But amidst the familiarity, there was also a sense of unfamiliarity. The arrogance of the sword was still present, but it was now filled with a domineering aura and even a dark aura. However, Mo Qianjun was able to confirm that the sword was from his best friend, Nie Tian. Nie Tian. Mo Qianjun jerked his head up and saw a familiar face. His whole body went stiff. Although he had already guessed that the person was Nie Tian, he was still shocked when he saw Nie Tian with his own eyes. Nie Tian had actually appeared at his moment of life and death. "Brother Mo, are you all right?" Nie Tian moved and appeared beside Mo Qianjun. Energy from the earth vein origin gushed out from his palm and surged into Mo Qianjun's body. Mo Qianjun's complexion improved instantly, but his eyes were still trembling uncontrollably. He could not believe what he was seeing. "Brother Mo, please step back. Leave the rest to me." Nie Tian smiled calmly and gestured for Mo Qianjun to step aside. Mo Qianjun replied and stepped aside. At this moment, the Black Serpent's venomous eyes locked onto Nie Tian and his voice was filled with murderous intent. "Kid, who are you?" He had already sensed Nie Tian's strength and was curious as to how an 8th-stage pseudo-sage swordsman with a transcendent sword soul had managed to block his attack. What made him even more curious was that Nie Tian's face was very unfamiliar. He seemed to be a swordsman who had just arrived in the sky. "I'm Mo Qianjun's friend. I don't care what grudges you have with him, but this battle ends here." Nie Tian looked at the black snake and said coldly, "If you want to do anything, come at me." His deep voice was filled with overbearingness. "Come for you? How arrogant of you!" Black Snake sneered. His eyes were filled with contempt as he said, "May I ask what is your status in the Sky Sword Marshal? 100 swords? Or 1,000 swords?" The crowd's gazes heated up as they looked at Nie Tian. They were obviously very curious about his identity. "I'm not 100 swords, nor am I 1,000 swords. I'm just a swordsman who has just arrived in the Sky Sword Marshal," Nie Tian said calmly in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. "A small fry." Black Snake's eyes narrowed when he heard Nie Tian's words. He then laughed wildly and said, "A small fry dares to speak so arrogantly? Who gave you the courage to interfere in a life-and-death battle between swordsmen?" The Black Snake laughed maniacally, its eyes revealing a sinister intent. At this time, the others also laughed. "Small fry? I didn't hear wrong, right? This kid is actually a small fry. What an idiot! How dare a small fry like him interfere in a life-and-death battle? Isn't he courting death? This kid's strength is not bad, but it's a pity that he's an idiot. Look at how arrogant he is. He really thinks he's someone important." The crowd roared with laughter as they looked at Nie Tian as if they were looking at an idiot. In the Sky Sword Marshal, outsiders were not allowed to interfere in a life-and-death battle between swordsmen. This was the rule of the Sky Sword Marshal. Of course, the Sky Guardians and Sky Sword Slaves could interfere because they were existences beyond the rules of the Sky Sword Marshal. Apart from the Sky Guardians and Sky Sword Slaves, even Wan Jian was not allowed to interfere in a life-and-death battle between swordsmen. The battle just now was the life-and-death battle between Mo Qianjun and Black Snake. Nie Tian actually dared to interfere. This was undoubtedly a violation of the rules of the Sky Sword Marshal. If his identity was at the level of Thousand Swords or Wan Jian, he might have a chance to survive. However, he was just a small fry that had just entered the Sky Sword Marshal. His fate was certain to be death. Swordsmen were the lowest and lowly existences among the Sky Sword Marshal, so they were often referred to as small fries. If you want to fight, I'll accompany you. If you don't want to, then forgive me for not accompanying you. Nie Tian ignored the words of the others and said coldly while looking at Black Snake. Small fries, you have already violated the rules of the Sky Sword Marshal by interfering in a life-and-death battle between swordsmen. Even if I don't kill you, you won't be able to live. Black Snake said cold, however, I will still kill you with my own hands. And your useless friend Mo Qianjun, he will also die, and he will die very miserably. Boom! After saying that, She took a step forward in the air and released a terrifying sword force. The sword chi actually condensed into a giant serpent figure outside his body. It was very terrifying and exuded a gloomy aura. His sword chi was very rare. Instead of condensing a sword shadow, it was condensed into the shadow of a snake. I don't want to kill you, but if you continue to be aggressive, then don't blame me for being impolite. Nie Tian said coldly with a murderous look on his face. Small fries, you are so arrogant. Aren't you afraid that the wind will cut your tongue? Black Snake smiled coldly and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Then, he moved his body and directly attacked with the sky-devouring mysterious snake in his hand. The sword in his hand slashed out wildly, and the shadow of the sword surged out like raging waves. Boom! In the void, a giant black snake appeared with a momentum that could devour the heavens, pressing down on Nie Tian. So strong. That small fries is dead for sure. The eyes of the crowd trembled as they thought to themselves. Although Nie Tian had displayed amazing combat strength, he was only an 8th-rank pseudo-sage, and his sword principle was only at the transcendent sword spirit. It was impossible for him to block Black Snake's attack. Sacred heaven-defying sword, heavenly sword reverses the sun. Hovering in midair, Nie Tian looked down at the giant serpent that was charging at him. His eyes narrowed as he summoned the star heaven slash. As he slashed out, the void trembled, and a sword shadow whizzed out with a fierce momentum, as if it was going to tear the void apart. In the next moment, a shocking scene happened. Kaboom! The terrifying shadow of the sword whizzed out and actually tore the black snake apart. The void exploded with a thunderous sound. Boom! Then, the shadow of the sword broke through the void and pressed down. Black Snake immediately felt a terrifying suppressive force that was going to tear his martial body apart. In the next moment, before Black Snake could react, his body was directly engulfed by the shadow of the sword. Not even his bones were left. 100 swords died tragically just like that. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, and the entire place fell into a deathly silence. Chapter 33:16. Chapter 3:11. 1,000 Swords of Wind and Thunder. Who is a small fry? The domineering voice was like a clap of thunder, resounding in everyone's ears, causing them to tremble as if they had been electrocuted. Nie Tian's battle prowess was so terrifying that it made everyone tremble. Nie Tian had killed the Black Serpent with just one sword strike. Such terrifying battle prowess could only be described as world-shaking. At this moment, everyone realized that this silver-haired swordsman who had just come to the Sky Sword Marshalism was not an ordinary swordfish. This is too terrifying. After a long time, everyone reacted and exclaimed. They looked at Nie Tian with unconcealable fear and dread. Nie Tian, however, didn't pay any attention to them. He turned around and prepared to leave. Boy, you broke the rules of the sky sword martialism and killed 100 swords. Do you think you can just leave like this? At this moment, a voice filled with killing intent rang out in the air. After that, a black-robed silhouette appeared, exuding an oppressive pressure that caused the entire space to tremble, causing everyone to feel a stifling pressure. Feeling great pressure, Nye Tian suddenly turned around. When he saw the martial artist in black, he could not help but narrow his eyes. This martial artist in black was as sharp as a sword, cold as ice, and his aura was very terrifying. Without a doubt, this was a swordsman with ultimacy. Nye Tian felt that this martial artist's sword essence was not inferior to Nye Fenghua's. Han Qianqiu. At the same time, Nye Fenghua saw the martial artist in black. His eyes narrowed and his expression turned ugly. This martial artist in black was called Han Qianqiu. His identity in the sky sword martialism was Thousand Swords. Thousand Swords was considered very powerful among the sword martialists in the sky sword martialism. The black serpent who had died under Nye Tian's sword was Han Qianqiu's subordinate. Han Qianqiu's appearance was obviously to avenge the black serpent. Lord Six Sky, are you still not going to make a move? Nye Fenghua frowned and looked at the void. The corner of his mouth twitched as he murmured in a low voice. In that void, a sharp figure was faintly discernible, obviously observing everything. This figure was Six Sky of the Sky Sword Martialists. The Six Sky Sword slaves were divided according to their strength. Their titles were Great Sky to Six Sky. Among the 6 Haotian sword slaves, Lu Haotian's strength was at the bottom. However, for others, he was definitely an existence that they could only look up to. Nye Fenghua knew that 6 sky martialists had been observing everything in the void, as if he was waiting for something. What he was waiting for was for Nye Tian to burst forth with even greater power. At this moment, Nye Tian was already very powerful and talented, but he still hadn't met his requirements. Sky. 6 at any 1 sky. Sword Saint 6 sword 6 9,000 swords, Nye Tian at any 1 saint, 1 sky of sword, sky of. 6 sword saints of spirit, of Nye of 1,000 king is sword. Of sword. Kid, the person you killed was Ben Qianjian's subordinate. If you can swagger away after killing him, then how can I, Han Qianqiu, be called 1,000 swords? Han Qianqiu's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He could no longer control the sword intent aura around him, and it continued to spread into the surroundings. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. An ear-piercing sound rang out in the space, as though space and time were slowly being torn apart under the pressure of the sword intent. So, you want to kill me? Nye Tian frowned slightly and said in a deep voice. Brat, although you have violated the rules of the Sky Sword Warrior, you are still a swordfish. This Qianqiu does not wish to bully the weak. If you can block this Qianqiu's sword, then you can live. Han Qianqiu's eyes surged with killing intent as he spoke. 1 strike, is it? Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly and the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. He stood with his hands behind his back and said lightly, Come on. Han Qianqiu's strength was not something she could compare with. However, Nye Tian was not afraid at all. The sword he used to kill she was far from his limit. If it was a life-and-death battle, he was very confident that he could kill Han Qianqiu. Trash, you have just come to the Sky Sword Warrior, so you have no idea how terrifying this place is. You swordsmen from the outside world are nothing in the eyes of the Sky Sword Warriors. Han Qianqiu sneered and took a step forward. His entire body's sword intent burst out, and his whole body was like a volcano that had suddenly erupted. The terrifying sword intent rushed into the void as though it was going to drown everything. So much nonsense. Nye Tian sneered and said directly, Make your move. You are courting death. Han Qianqiu was instantly enraged, and the sword intent in his body instantly became violent. It actually formed a terrifying storm of blades around his body. It was like a hurricane, exploding and extremely sharp. What a terrifying aura! The eyes of the crowd trembled, and they were shocked by Han Qianqiu's strength. A swordsman of the wind attribute, no wonder his sword intent is so sharp. Nie Tian's eyes slightly narrowed as he said indifferently. Han Qianqiu was a rare swordsman of the wind attribute, which was out of Nie Tian's expectation. Trash, I am not just a simple swordsman of the wind attribute. Nie Tian's voice was very soft, but it was heard clearly by Han Qianqiu. The latter sneered and took a step forward. The sword-intent hurricane around his body suddenly moved, and it madly rushed towards Nie Tian. The five senses of a rank 9 pseudo-sacred martial artist had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Their eyesight could directly see the scene hundreds of thousands of meters away, and their hearing could hear the slightest movement within tens of thousands of meters. Their sense of smell and other abilities were also very terrifying. Boom! At the moment when the sword-intent hurricane crashed down, there was a sudden explosion. Immediately after, in the center of the hurricane, the power of a dark thunderbolt appeared, stretching for tens of thousands of meters and pressing towards Nie Tian. Dual attribute of wind and thunder. Nie Tian's eyes slightly narrowed as he realized that Han Qianqiu was a swordsman of the dual attribute of wind and thunder. However, the aura of his sword intent of the wind attribute was more intense, and it covered the sword intent of the thunder attribute. However, his sword intent of the thunder attribute was more lethal. This guy is dead for sure. The crowd's eyes trembled. They had already determined that the moment the power of the thunderbolt fell, it would be the moment that Nie Tian's soul would perish. Nie Tian stood in the air, and there was no fear in his eyes. Instead, he was as calm as an ancient well. Sacred heaven-defying sword, earth and man unite, stars and moons sink. The next moment, the corner of his mouth twitched, and the sword intent burst out of his body. The star's heavenly slash went against the momentum, and suddenly, the sword shadow in the air like a startled dragon, stirring up the void and making it tremble. Boom! 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 Then, the power of the thunderbolt and the sword shadow collided head-on. The void suddenly exploded, and a wave of sword intent appeared. In the world of sword martial arts in the sky, the fact that Nie Tian and Han Qianqiu's sword intent could form a wave of sword intent was enough to prove the strength of their sword intents. The crowd's eyes widened and they gasped in shock. They had never thought that Nie Tian would be able to explode with such a powerful sword intent. However, Nie Tian was clearly only at the level of sword soul surpassing God. How could his sword intent be so terrifying? Bang! At this time, there was a muffled explosion in the sky. Nie Tian and Han Qianqiu's figures retreated 1,000 meters at the same time, and then they both stood still. However, the expressions on the two's faces were completely different. Nie Tian's face was calm, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. There was a faint smile on his face. On the other hand, Han Qianqiu's face was so gloomy that it looked like it was dripping blood. His eyes were bloodshot, and his body was trembling. This sword was actually on par with the two of them. Chapter 33:17. Contemptible wretch. Han Qianqiu's eyes trembled, his face trembled, and his body trembled. Even the blood in his body was trembling, as though his entire being was boiling. He was one of the 1,000 swords, but he was tied with a new swordfish. How could he accept this? Anger, killing intent, madness, like a storm, it enveloped him, making him look extremely violent and sinister. At this moment, Nie Tian looked at Han Qianqiu and said indifferently, "Lord Qianqiu, is this your sword move?" His words were filled with extreme mockery. Before Han Qianqiu made his move, he swore that if Nie Tian could block one of his sword strikes, he would be able to live. It was obvious that he was very confident in his sword. However, not only did Nie Tian easily receive his sword, He was not weaker than him. At this moment, Nie Tian's words were like a slap to Han Qianqiu's face. "Stinking brat, you!" Han Qianqiu's eyes darkened to the extreme, and he gritted his teeth. He had never imagined that Nie Tian's strength could actually be so terrifying. His earlier attack was enough to kill a swordsman with a pseudo-divine sword body rank 9. However, Nie Tian was only a pseudo-divine sword soul rank 8. How could he block his attack so easily? If he had known that Nie Tian was such a monster, Han Qianqiu would have gone all out in that attack. But now, he couldn't attack anymore. After all, he was Thousand Swords. If he went back on his word in front of so many people, he would no longer have any prestige among the sword martial artists in the sky. "Since the sword has passed, I won't play with you anymore." Nie Tian smiled faintly and prepared to leave. Han Qianqiu stared at Nie Tian, a cold light flashing in his eyes. The blood in his body was roiling as a bloody aura began to emanate from him. He was unwilling. The crowd looked at Han Qianqiu and could not help but whisper among themselves. "Lord Han Qianjian, are we going to let this kid go just like that? What else can I do?" Han Qianjian was too careless and underestimated this new fish. "But since I've already said it, I can't go back on my words." Han Qianjian suffered a great loss this time. Not only did he lose one of his 100 swords, he also lost face in front of everyone. He really suffered a double loss. Some people couldn't help but laugh. When Han Qianqiu heard these words, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and the blood in his body began to boil uncontrollably. Boom! The next moment, his body shook, and a terrifying sword momentum surged around him. It was extremely terrifying, and the sharp aura actually formed an invisible ripple in the air. What is Han Qianjian doing? Was he crazy? He's going back on his word in front of everyone. When the crowd saw this, their eyes trembled violently, and they cried out in alarm. Everyone knew that Han Qianqiu was resentful, but they never imagined that he would go back on his word in front of everyone. Looking at his posture, it was clear that he was going to attack Nie Tian. Nie Tian suddenly turned around and couldn't help but frown when he saw Han Qianqiu in a rage. "Stinking brat, I said that I would let you live, but I didn't say that I would let your friend live." At this moment, Han Qianqiu's voice was like thunder, and his figure directly moved. A dark green long sword appeared in his hand, and he actually slashed the sword at Emo Qianjun. He was very smart. He didn't attack Nie Tian, but Emo Qianjun instead. He had said in front of everyone that if Nie Tian could withstand his sword, he would be able to live. Of course, he couldn't go back on his word. However, he could kill Emo Qianjun to vent the hatred in his heart. Moreover, he could see that Emo Qianjun was very important to Nie Tian, so it was impossible for Nie Tian to just stand by and watch. "Damn it!" Nie Tian's face darkened, and he roared in a low voice. His figure instantly moved, and Starlight Heavenly Slash was unleashed. The sword's shadow roared, and like a giant roaring dragon, it attacked Han Qianqiu. "Small fry, if you dare to attack me, then don't blame me for being ruthless." Han Qianqiu suddenly turned in midair, and the sword's edge directly changed. It directly turned towards Nie Tian, and crazily slashed at him. The sudden change in the sky caused everyone to be shocked. One after another, they all sucked in a breath of cold air, and the shock in their hearts was indescribable. At this moment, anyone with a bit of brain could see that Han Qianqiu's move was a hidden sword. On the surface, it seemed that he wanted to kill Emo Qianjun, but in reality, he wanted to kill Nie Tian. He was certain that Nie Tian would definitely save Emo Qianjun, and then he would force Nie Tian to attack him. Seeing this scene, Nie Fenghua's face darkened and he roared, "Despicable! Someone of Han Qianqiu's status actually used this kind of method. It was really despicable." Boom! At this time, in the void, the power of a dark thunder appeared. It was extremely terrifying, and it struck down from the sky. It was actually tens of thousands of meters long, and it seemed that even the heaven and earth would be split apart. Han Qianqiu was indeed despicable. He secretly accumulated his sword intent, and wanted to kill Nie Tian with a single strike. With his status, if he still couldn't kill Nie Tian with a second strike, he would really lose all his face. 9 limits of starry sky, sun annihilation. In a hurry, Nie Tian stabbed out with his sword. The sword's shadow rolled out like a rolling mountain, and its majestic momentum shook the heaven and earth. Rumble! In the next moment, the two extreme forces collided, and the heaven and earth trembled. The rolling momentum spread out like a raging sea, as if it wanted to swallow everything. Bang! Then, a muffled sound was heard, and a blood-colored figure was sent flying. After retreating for a few thousand meters, he finally stabilized his body. It's that kid, he's not dead. The crowd's eyes trembled as they stared at the blood-colored figure. After a shout, their faces were full of shock. On Nie Tian's body, there was a horrifying wound, from his shoulder to his waist. It was so deep that his bones could be seen, and his entire body was covered in blood. This bloody gash practically split his entire body into 2 halves. This was left behind by Han Qianqiu's dark thunderbolt. If this thunderbolt was a little stronger, Nie Tian would have definitely been cut in half. It had to be said that Nie Tian's martial body was really strong. He had actually forcefully resisted the dark thunderbolt. Han Qianqiu looked at Nie Tian, and his eyes froze for a moment. Then, a shocked expression appeared on his face. Nie Tian was actually not dead. This was something that he had not expected. He had almost used all his strength in that thunderbolt, but Nie Tian was still alive. How was this possible? Han Qianqiu's face became more and more ugly, from white to green, from green to red, from red to black. His eyes were sinister, like a poisonous wolf that was about to devour a human. The mighty 1,000 swords couldn't even kill a new fish with 2 strikes. How could he put his face? Despicable bastard! At this time, Nie Tian's body suddenly moved. With a sudden jerk, the blood on his body scattered, and the wound on his chest began to heal. Chapter 33:18. Attack! Dragon Roar! The crowd gasped with astonishment as they stared at Nie Tian with wide eyes, disbelief filling their faces. Nie Tian's body was emitting a dragon roar. Was he a member of the Sage Realm Dragon Clan? Rumor had it that the Sage Realm Dragon Clan possessed an extremely powerful dragon bloodline. It was extremely terrifying. There is a dragon roar in this kid's body. He must be a Sage Realm Dragon Clan member. The crowd thought to themselves, trembling. They looked at Nie Tian with even more shock. The Sage Realm Dragon Clan was a martial artist from the Holy World. No wonder Nie Tian was so powerful. It turned out that he was from the Saints' World. The Sword Martial School in the sky was not only connected to various domains, but also to some holy world. There were many martial artists from the Holy World in the Sword Martial School in the sky. Is this kid really a Sage Realm Dragon Clan member? Han Qianqiu muttered to himself as he looked at Nie Tian. His eyes flickered as if he was afraid. If Nie Tian was a Sage Realm Dragon Clan member, it meant that he was from the Holy World and had a powerful force behind him. Han Qianqiu had heard that the Sage Realm Dragon Clan members had 2 forms, human and dragon. Moreover, the Sage Realm Dragon Clan members had an obvious characteristic, a strong martial body. The Dragon Clan members had the dragon bloodline. Their martial body was very strong and their recovery ability was astonishing. Nie Tian's performance at the moment, a strong martial body, a freakish recovery ability, and the dragon roar in his body. It was obvious that he was a Sage Realm Dragon Clan member. Han Qianqiu was more and more convinced of his guess. He could not help but panic. He had a vague feeling that he had provoked someone he could not afford to offend. A Dragon Clan member? Up in the sky, the 6th Sky Master looked at Nie Tian and frowned. Then he twitched his mouth and murmured to himself, "It seems that he is not a Dragon Clan member, but a martial artist who has merged with the dragon vein. He was very far away from Nie Tian, but he could still tell that the dragon roar in Nie Tian's body came from the dragon vein. This kid is interesting. Number 6 Sky narrowed his eyes slightly and the corners of his mouth twitched again. His eyes were burning with passion, as if he was very interested in Nie Tian. Since you want to fight, then come. At this time, Nie Tian looked at Han Qianqiu and growled, I challenge you right now, let's fight to the death. A battle of life and death. These 4 words were like a clap of thunder, causing everyone's eyes to tremble. They were shocked to the extreme. A swordfish that had just arrived at the Sky Sword Marshal actually wanted to challenge a 1,000 swords powerhouse. Wasn't this courting death? Indeed, Nie Tian had displayed an almost abnormal battle prowess just now, but he was still at a disadvantage. Han Qianqiu's sword had failed to kill him, but it had seriously injured him. For Nie Tian to openly issue a challenge at this time was tantamount to striking a rock with an egg. This kid from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan is still too young. With his status, there's no need for him to fight with Han Qianjian. After all, he's too young. He's too impulsive. Impulsiveness is the devil. If such a talented Dragon Clan swordsman dies like this, it'll really make people excited, heh heh heh. The crowd's eyes were trembling with passion, as if they couldn't wait to see the moment when Nie Tian was killed. They were all sure that Nie Tian was from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan and had a distinguished background. He was not an ordinary martial artist, and the more distinguished a person was, the more satisfied they felt when they saw him die in front of them. Kid, do you really want to fight to the death with me? Han Qianqiu looked at Nie Tian and couldn't help but tremble in fear. He hadn't expected that Nie Tian would dare to challenge him. In his opinion, the sword just now had already made Nie Tian unable to fight back. If Nie Tian challenged him now, he would be courting death. Attack! Nie Tian's eyes were gloomy, and his long sword swept across the sky as he spat out 2 words coldly. His current state was indeed not good, and he hadn't fully recovered from his previous injuries. But in the face of the aggressive Han Qianqiu, he couldn't retreat anymore. He wanted to fight and let everyone know that he, Nie Tian, wasn't a pushover. If he retreated at this time, he was afraid that his future days in the Sky Sword Martial competition would not be good. Kid, you forced me to do this. Don't think that I'll be afraid of you just because you have a distinguished status. In the Sky Sword Martial competition, your status is useless. Han Qianqiu's eyes trembled, and his eyes became murderous as he growled coldly. He believed that Nie Tian was from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan, so he wanted to let Nie Tian go. However, Nie Tian insisted on challenging him, so he had no choice but to kill him. Even if Nie Tian was from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan, it would be useless in the Sky Sword Martial competition. So much nonsense. Nie Tianling sneered. From the discussion of the crowd just now, he already knew that they thought that he was from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan. He didn't need to clarify anything, and he disdained to do so. You're courting death, Han Qianqiu said coldly and then looked at the sky. He cupped his hands and said, Your Excellency in the 6th sky, you saw that I didn't want to kill him, but he was courting death. If he dies in my hands, Your Excellency in the sky, please prove that he was courting death, and it had nothing to do with me. In the end, Han Qianqiu was still afraid of the Sage Realm Dragon Clan, so he asked the 6th sky for instructions. Nie Fenghua could sense the existence of the 6th sky, and so could Han Qianqiu. Your Excellency in the 6th sky is also here? Hearing Han Qianqiu's words, the crowd couldn't help but be shocked, and then looked at the sky. Han Qianqiu, he's not from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan. You don't have to worry about anything. The void was silent for a while, and then a deep voice came out, with a sharp aura that seemed to pierce through people's eardrums. It made people feel a deep pressure. Huh! Hearing the 6th sky's words, Han Qianqiu was stunned at first, and then his eyes trembled with a hint of surprise. He bowed and said, "Thank you, Your Excellency in the sky." The sixth sky replied, and directly said that Nye Tian wasn't from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan. This was something that Han Qianqiu hadn't expected even in his wildest dreams. In this way, he really didn't have to worry about anything. "Young man, the sky, would like to see how strong you are." In the void, the sixth sky fixed his eyes on Nye Tian and smiled. "I hope you won't disappoint me, the sky." The sixth sky was shocked by Nye Tian's strength. He could feel that there was an even more powerful force in Nye Tian's body. Therefore, he wanted to see how strong Nye Tian's combat strength was. So this young man isn't from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan. It was a false alarm. The crowd looked at Nye Tian, and when they realized what was going on, they burst into laughter. The fear in their eyes instantly turned into contempt. "You're dead, you small fry." At that moment, Han Qianqiu stepped forward, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. The sword essence in his body burst out like a tsunami, forming a terrible storm of sword essence around his body. Boom! 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 A terrifying storm of sword intent surged into the void, causing the heavens and earth to tremble and the weather to change. This time, Han Qianqiu was really angry. Chapter 33:19. A shocking battle, what a terrifying aura! The crowd could feel the terrifying waves coming from the sky, and they were all shocked. The power that Han Qianqiu displayed now was much stronger than before. It seemed that Han Qianqiu had hidden some of his strength in the previous two attacks. Nye Tian. Nye Fenghua felt Han Qianqiu's aura and his eyes narrowed. He was a little nervous. He was not sure if Nye Tian had the strength to fight Han Qianqiu to the death. If Nye Tian was at his peak, there should be no problem. But Nye Tian's old injuries had not yet healed, and he had suffered new ones. His condition was very poor. Could he be a match for Han Qianqiu? Brother Nye. On the other side, Emo Qianjun looked at Nye Tian worriedly. The strength that Nye Tian had displayed had deeply shocked him. Only now did he realize that the distance between him and Nye Tian had widened. But at this moment, Nye Tian's opponent was Han Qianqiu, a cultivator with 1,000 swords. Small fry, prepare to die. Han Qianqiu's roar was like thunder. His aura was extremely violent, and a terrifying aura flowed around his body. It was as if his every move could cause the heavens and earth to tremble. "Come on." Nye Tian's eyes were dark, and his face was as calm as still water. There was not the slightest ripple in his eyes. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and then the sword will in his body surged wildly. At this moment, the celestial evolution saint spirit in his body became violent. The celestial evolution saint power was like a fierce beast, rushing into his body and merging with the sword will. Once again, he used the celestial evolution saint power to forcefully increase the level of his swordsmanship. What's going on? That kid's sword will aura is actually becoming stronger. At this moment, the crowd felt that something was wrong, and their eyes trembled as they cried out. Everyone present was a swordsman, and they were all sword geniuses of their respective fields. They were very sensitive to the aura of sword will. What they could not believe was that Nye Tian's sword will was actually becoming stronger. It was too strange. A swordsman's sword will aura should be stable, and it should not be suddenly becoming stronger. His sword principal realm has increased. At the next moment, someone noticed the abnormality and cried out. Their faces were filled with shock, as if they had seen the most terrifying thing in the world. They simply couldn't believe their eyes. A swordsman's sword Dao cultivation had risen by a great realm in an instant. He had only heard of the explosive Yuan pill being able to forcefully raise a cultivator's cultivation, but he had never seen a swordsman forcefully raise his sword Dao realm. What kind of person was Nye Tian? What kind of tricks was he using? The crowd was completely shocked. Their faces were lifeless, and countless eyes looked at Nye Tian as if they were looking at a monster. Die! Han Qianxiu had naturally sensed the changes in Nie Tian's sword intent. But at this moment, he didn't have the time to think too much about it. He could only go all out and kill with a single strike. Boom! With a furious roar, Han Qianxiu slashed out furiously with his sword. All of the sword intent in his body condensed in an instant, and a gigantic sword intent hurricane appeared. It was ferocious and terrifying, churning in the air. Suddenly, an incomparably powerful strangulation force appeared, instantly filling the space within a radius of tens of thousands of meters. The crowd that was more than 100,000 meters away all felt a suffocating pressure. Han Qianxiu was indeed worthy of being called 1,000 swords. The strength of his sword intent and his control of it had reached the acme of perfection. Roar! In the next moment, a violent roar came from within the storm of sword intent. Then, a giant dark thunder beast appeared and fiercely pounced out. The void suddenly sank, as if it was about to collapse. The body of the giant dark beast was tens of thousands of meters long, and dark thunder flowed around its body. It was incomparably terrifying, as if it was about to devour the world. When the crowd saw this scene, their eyes suddenly trembled, and they exclaimed, "So strong!" At this moment, the crowd finally saw Han Qianxiu's true strength. 1,000 swords martial artist was indeed very terrifying. When his aura erupted, heaven and earth shook. Sacred heaven-defying sword, earth and man become one, stars and moons sink. At this moment, Nie Tianling stood in the void, like a boulder in the midst of a storm. He did not move at all, and even his face was expressionless. Only the corner of his mouth twitched, as if he was mumbling to himself. In the next moment, the sword intent around his body surged wildly, and at the same time, there was a dripping blood aura. Boom! Following which, the starlight heavenly slash was unleashed, and a blood-colored sword shadow whizzed out from where the sword tip pointed. It was like a ferocious beast pouncing out from the boundless raging sea. Its momentum was boundlessly terrifying. In this attack, not only did Nie Tian use the heavenly evolution holy power to raise his sword principle to the ultimate divine sword body, but he also ignited his blood qi to stimulate the power of the sword intent even more violently. At this moment, his martial body felt like it was about to explode. It was as if the meridians and bones in his body were about to be torn apart. The pressure brought about by the heavenly evolution holy power and self-igniting blood qi was extremely terrifying. Even though Nie Tian's martial body was strong, it was still very difficult. It was precisely because of this that this attack allowed him to explode with his maximum power. Boom! Boom! In the void, the dark lightning beast and the terrifying sword shadow whistled, causing heaven and earth to roar, as if the sky and earth were about to collapse. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes, the two terrifying forces collided with each other. Heaven and earth became solemn, and time and space suddenly stopped. Then, the violent power turned into a raging wave that surged wildly, as if the entire world was about to be drowned. Boom, boom, boom. In the sky, ear-piercing rumbling sounds could be heard. The powerful and terrifying impact was like a wild beast in the sky, and thousands of demons danced wildly. These two people are too strong. The eyes of the crowd trembled, and the shock in their hearts was indescribable. After all, Han Qianxiu was 1,000 swords. It was not surprising that he had such powerful strength. However, Nie Tian was only an 8th-stage pseudosage, and his sword principle was only at the transcendent sword soul realm. How could he explode with such terrifying power? Boom! After a long time, the dark lightning beast and the blood-colored sword shadow collapsed at almost the same time. Then, with a muffled sound, the two figures instantly retreated, and were pushed 10,000 meters away. In the air, Nie Tian's astral soul wings appeared on his back, and he stabilized his body. His face was as pale as a sheet of paper, but he was not injured. On the other side, Han Qianxiu stabilized himself, but his face was very ugly. There were several frightening wounds on his body, and blood was dripping from them. In the collision of the ultimate sword, Han Qianqiu had lost. How is this possible? The crowd was shocked, and they could not believe their eyes. What did they see? After the sword attack, the person who was injured was actually Han Qianqiu, and Nie Tian was actually unharmed. Everyone's eyes were focused on Nie Tian, as if they were looking at a monster, and the shock in their hearts reached deep into their souls. The sword intent that Nie Tian had displayed had subverted their understanding of the sword principle. It was unimaginable that someone's sword intent could be so terrifying. Puff! However, at this moment, Nie Tian's body trembled slightly, and then he vomited a mouthful of blood, and his face became even paler. He's injured! The crowd's eyes trembled, and they exclaimed. Nie Tian frowned, and he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He was not injured by Han Qianqiu, but under the double pressure of the celestial evolution sacred force and blood qi, his martial body could not withstand it, and he was injured instead. Chapter 33:20. Chapter 3:15. Battle in the Sky Die. Han Qianqiu roared in the sky. His eyes were eerie as he swung his sword at Nie Tian. Even though he had been defeated and injured, he still had the strength to fight. On the other hand, Nie Tian was not defeated, but he was injured. Before Nie Tian made his move, he was already in a very bad state. The celestial sacred force and the blood qi were so oppressive that he could not bear it, and his martial body was severely injured. Therefore, Han Qianqiu had the absolute advantage. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his heart sank. At this moment, if he were to forcefully use the celestial sacred force to break through to the martial body, even if he could explode with great power, it would cause great harm to his martial body. It might even damage his martial arts foundation. However, if he did not use the celestial sacred force, he would not be able to block Han Qianqiu's fatal strike. In an instant, he was caught in a dilemma. Lord Sixth Sky, are you still not going to make your move? At this moment, Nie Fenghua looked at the sky, his eyes trembling. He was ready to make his move. He was also in a very bad state at this moment. The backlash from the sword seal was still there. If he were to forcefully use the sword will, it would cause great harm to his martial body. Boom! In the next instant, a black lightning bolt appeared. It was extremely fast, sharp and deadly, and it attacked Nie Tian. Nie Tian immediately felt a terrifying suppressive force, which actually made him feel like he was suffocating. Swoosh! At this moment of life and death, a sword will suddenly appeared in the void, piercing through the air like the wind and lightning. It was so fast that it was difficult for the naked eye to follow, as if it was tearing through the void. Poof! The sword will looked ordinary, but the moment it fell, it pierced through the black lightning bolt. The black lightning bolt immediately collapsed, turning into sword will and dissipating. Han Qianqiu's body froze as he muttered in confusion. He then looked at the sky in shock. The figure that entered his eyes caused his expression to freeze, and he was immediately dumbfounded. The person who had made the move was none other than Sixth Sky. At this moment, the Sixth Sky's figure descended. His footwork was strange, and he floated over like a ghost. This person's sword will is so strong. Nie Tian looked up at the Sixth Sky and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He was shocked. The Sixth Sky in front of him was too terrifying. That sword intent just now could be said to be terrifying to the point of being bizarre. It had easily neutralized Han Qianqiu's ultimate move. Outside of the Sixth Sky's body, there was a faint halo, which was very mysterious. It seemed to be some kind of sword formation. Nie Tian could only sense that the Sixth Sky was very powerful, but he could not tell how strong the latter was. It could be concluded that the Sixth Sky was definitely a Saint Realm martial artist, and his sword Dao realm had already surpassed the transcendent three realms. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stop Han Qianqiu in such a crushing manner. Lord Sixth Hao Tian, When everyone saw Sixth Hao Tian appear, their eyes froze, and they were extremely shocked. They already knew that the Sixth Sky had been secretly watching the battle between Ye Tian and Han Qianqiu. However, they didn't expect that the Sixth Sky would personally intervene. Lord Sixth Sky. Han Qianqiu looked at the Sixth Sky and bowed deeply. He was very respectful. At this moment, he already had a bad feeling in his heart. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to kill Nie Tian. Han Qianqiu, this battle is over, the Sixth Sky said indifferently without looking at Han Qianqiu. His tone was very calm, without the slightest bit of aggression. However, there was an inviolable dominance in his calm tone. Han Qianqiu's heart sank. He didn't even dare to hesitate and nodded. His heart was filled with unwillingness, but what was the use of it? He did not dare disobey the Sixth Haotian in the slightest. Then, the Sixth Sky looked at Nie Tian with an expressionless face and asked, "What's your name?" Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He was neither servile nor overbearing. "Who is Nie Fenghua to you?" The Sixth Sky's eyes flickered with a strange light as he asked. "My father." Nie Tian nodded again. "Very well." The Sixth Sky's eyes flickered again. The corner of his mouth twitched a little as he said, "I, the Sky, will give you 10 days. After 10 days, I, the Sky, will fight with you." Nie Tian's expression changed when he heard the Sixth Sky's words. He thought he had heard it wrong. The Sixth Sky actually wanted to fight with him. The crowd was also stunned. Their faces were filled with disbelief. The Sixth Sky actually took the initiative to challenge Nie Tian. He was treating Nie Tian as a real opponent. Was Nie Tian really that strong? Nie Tian was stunned. He was speechless for a long time. He didn't know the Sixth Sky's strength at all. The difference between the two of them was indescribable. Was there any point in fighting with such a difference? Don't worry. The Sixth Sky obviously knew what Nie Tian was thinking. He said, "I, the Sky, won't take advantage of you. When I fight with you, I, the Sky, will suppress my strength and realm to the same as yours. For the next 10 days, you don't have to do anything else. Just focus on recovering your strength." With that, the Sixth Haotian took a glance at Nie Tian, and then his figure flashed and vanished like a streak of light. Nie Tian was stunned. He looked at the place where the Sixth Sky disappeared. He couldn't react for a long time. Nie Tian, follow Nie Fenghua. At this time, the Sixth Sky's voice sounded again. Then, it disappeared completely. Nie Tian frowned. After a long time, he laughed. He didn't expect to receive a challenge from the Sky on the first day he came to the Sky Swordsmith. Small fry, count yourself lucky. At this time, Han Qianqiu looked at Nie Tian fiercely. He growled and left unwillingly. The Sixth Sky and Nie Tian's challenge made everyone stay away from Nie Tian. If someone wanted to kill Nie Tian at this time, they would undoubtedly be going against the Sixth Sky. In the Sky Swordsmiths, except for the Sky Guardians, no one dared to go against the sword slaves of the Sky. The Sky Swordsmiths were in charge of everyone in the Sky Swordsmiths, except for the Sky Guardians. The others looked at Nie Tian with fear in their eyes. It took a long time for them to disperse. Nie Tian. At this time, Nie Fenghua and Mo Qianjun came to Nie Tian's side and called out at the same time. Nie Tian smiled faintly and introduced them to each other. Junior Mo Qianjun greets Lord Uncle. Mo Qianjun looked puzzled. He didn't expect Nie Tian to have a father. He bowed deeply to Nie Fenghua and said respectfully, "Your martial Dao cultivation is not high, but your sword Dao realm is very strong. Not bad." Nie Fenghua nodded slightly. He didn't pay attention to Mo Qianjun before. Only now did he realize that the latter was a rare sword Dao genius. "Brother Mo, are you okay?" Nie Tian couldn't help but ask when he saw Mo Qianjun's ugly expression. "I'm fine, but Brother Jiu." Mo Qianjun furrowed his brows and his expression became even uglier. He couldn't finish his sentence. Jiu Qianxing. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. What happened to him? Jiu Qianxing was indeed with Mo Qianjun, but from Mo Qianjun's reaction, it seemed that something had happened to Jiu Qianxing. In fact, the reason why Mo Qianjun had challenged the Black Serpent was because of Jiu Qianxing. Brother Nie, come with me. Mo Qianjun did not answer directly. Instead, he nodded his head and flew toward a valley below with a movement of his body. Chapter 33:21. Jiu Qianxing. In the sky soared Martial City, outside a valley. Nie Fenghua, Nie Tian, and Mo Qianjun were standing at the entrance of the valley. Nie Tian exclaimed in surprise as he stared at the valley in front of him. Before he entered the valley, he could already smell a rotten stench, as if the valley in front of him was a huge morgue. Brother Jiu. Mo Qianjun looked at Nie Tian uneasily and choked for a moment before he said, Brother Jiu is in the valley. Nie Tian's eyes trembled and his heart skipped a beat when he saw Mo Qianjun's reaction. He suddenly had a bad feeling about this. He then entered the valley. Roar. At that moment, a low roar was heard. It sounded like the roar of a wild beast, and it was filled with a bloody and violent aura. Nie Tian frowned and stepped into the valley without hesitation. His eyes narrowed and his face stiffened when he saw the scene before him. In the valley there were several huge iron chains, and in the middle of those iron chains was a black figure. This black figure was simply too strange and terrifying. He was lying on the ground like a dog. His entire body was black, and he looked like a skeleton. However, there were pieces of rotten flesh hanging on the outside of the skeleton. The flesh was extremely bloody, and it gave off a nauseating smell. However, his face was 70% human. His eyes were bloodshot, and they were filled with a violent aura. Roar, roar, roar. He stared at Nie Tian and let out a deep roar. It sounded extremely eerie. This is... Nie Tian was stunned for a long time before he finally spoke. His voice was trembling and he could not say a word. He could clearly sense Jiu Qianxing's aura from the monster in front of him. Jiu Qianxing. The monster in front of him was the former Sword Emperor of the Western region, Jiu Qianxing. Nie Tian's eyes were trembling. He could not believe what he was seeing. His best friend, his sworn brother, had turned into this. How could he accept it? Mo Qianjun stood behind Nie Tian and nodded with a pained expression. This monster was none other than Jiu Qianxing. This... Nie Tian's pupils shrank. His killing intent surged and his blood surged. He roared, "Who did this?" Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying aura surged from his body, causing the entire valley to shake. Roar! At that moment, Jiu Qianxing seemed to be provoked. With a loud roar, he sprang into action, leaping into the air and reaching out with his sharp claws towards Nie Tian. "Be careful!" Nie Fenghua cried out in fright upon seeing this. Nie Tian stood still, allowing the sharp claws to fall and leave several bloody wounds on his chest. Nie Tian. Nie Fenghua stared blankly, momentarily speechless. In that instant just now, Nie Tian's reaction speed and power would have been more than enough to kill Jiu Qianxing. However, how could he have done that? Even if Jiu Qianxing had turned into a monster, he was still Nie Tian's brother. Mo Qianjun was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He pulled Nie Tian and asked nervously, "Nie Tian, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Nie Tian looked at the wound on his chest and said in a deep voice. The wound left by Jiu Qianxing was very strange. The blood was black and there was a dark force flowing around it. Even though Nie Tian's martial body was strong, it took a long time for the wound to heal. Mo Qianjun was stunned when he saw that the wound on Nie Tian's chest had healed. Jiu Qianxing's attack had been infused with powerful sealing power, yet Nie Tian had remained unscathed after being injured by it. This was very strange. "Jiu Qianxing, I'm Nie Tian. Don't you recognize me?" At that moment, Nie Tian suddenly took a step forward and glared at Jiu Qianxing as he growled in a low voice. Wu! Jiu Qianxing seemed to be frightened. He retreated, not daring to approach Nie Tian. It seemed that Nie Tian had a power in his body that made him feel apprehensive. Jiu Qianxing was even more shocked when he saw this. Jiu Qianxing had lost all reason. He should not be afraid of anything. Why was he afraid of Nie Tian? Brother Emo, what's going on? Nie Tian asked Emo Qianjun after he saw that Jiu Qianxing did not respond. Ai. Emo Qianjun sighed. After a long time, he told the whole story. Eternally Merciless had brought Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing into the Sky Sword Marshals. Eternally Merciless was one of the 7 Sky Protectors. Not only did he have the responsibility of protecting the Sky Sword Marshals, but he also had to search for geniuses from the various domains to enter the Sky Sword Marshals to cultivate. It wasn't just Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing. Nie Fenghua and Bailey Xingxue had also been brought into the Sky Sword Marshals by Eternally Merciless. It was a good thing that Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing had entered the Sky Sword Marshals. However, when they had first arrived, they had often been bullied because they were too weak. Strength reigned supreme. This was the law of survival for the Sky Sword Marshals. Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing had endured the humiliation and survived. Moreover, their strength had increased rapidly. Originally, the two of them had had a chance to grow to the 10 sword. Then, things would have been easier. However, 3 months ago, Jiu Qianxing had been summoned by Black Serpent to carry out a secret mission. Black Serpent was one of the 100 swords, so he naturally couldn't refuse. However, not long after, Jiu Qianxing had returned. His entire person had changed. First, he had become irritable. Then, black spots had appeared on his body. Finally, he had become like this. During this period, Emo Qianjun had gone to find Black Serpent many times to find out what had happened to Jiu Qianxing. However, he had been beaten up by Black Serpent every time. That day, Emo Qianjun had realized that Jiu Qianxing wouldn't live for long. Therefore, he had decided to challenge Black Serpent and take revenge for Jiu Qianxing. Nie Tian knew everything that had happened after that. Black Serpent. Nie Tian's eyes darkened when he heard what Emo Qianjun had to say. He had practically shouted Black Serpent's name through his gritted teeth. Previously, he had killed Black Serpent with a single slash. That had been too easy for him. Compared to what Jiu Qianxing had endured, Black Serpent had died too easily. After a while, Nie Tian became cold and looked at Emo Qianjun. So you don't know what happened to Jiu Qianxing either? Yes. Emo Qianjun nodded. His expression was ugly as he said, back then, Black Serpent was the one who called Jiu Qianxing away. Now that he is dead, I don't know who to look for. Han Qianxiu. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he uttered a name cold. Black Serpent was Han Qianxiu's subordinate. Nie Tian didn't believe that Han Qianxiu didn't know about this. But, Emo Qianjun looked at Nie Tian with a stiff expression. He said, Han Qianxiu is 1,000 swords. I don't care if he is 1,000 swords or Wan Jian. If he dares to touch my brother, I won't let him go. Nie Tian growled. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. He didn't care who Han Qianxiu was. Right now, saving Jiu Qianxing was the most important thing. Not to mention Han Qianxiu, a mere 1,000 swords cultivator, even if he were Haotian, Nie Tian wouldn't fear him in the slightest. Chapter 33:22. Chapter 3:17. Soul Burning Curse, Soul Burning Curse. Nie Tian's eyes suddenly froze when he heard these 4 words. Soul Burning Curse? What is that? Emo Qianjun exclaimed in horror as he looked at Nie Fenghua with a gloomy face. He didn't expect Nie Fenghua to know what was in Jiu Qianxing's body. The soul-burning curse is a kind of evil curse that contains an evil force. Those who are cursed will have their sword intent and divine sense slowly burned. their martial body will decay bit by bit and their divine sense will be devoured bit by bit. In the end, they will die like a rotten corpse. Nie Fenghua's face was gloomy as he said in a deep voice. So that's how it is. Mo Qianjuan's eyes flashed with coldness after hearing Nie Fenghua's words. He said angrily, Black Snake must have planted the soul-burning curse in Brother Zhou's body. It's not him. Nie Fenghua's eyes swept over Mo Qianjun and said, Black Snake is just 100 swords. He's not strong enough to control the soul-burning curse. If it's not Black Snake, then who is it? Mo Qianjuan's eyes trembled as he suppressed his anger. Black Snake is just a chess piece. There must be an expert behind him. Nie Fenghua's face was gloomy. His eyes flickered as if he was afraid of something. He knew that the soul-burning curse was not something a swordsman like the Black Serpent could master. Even the Clear Sky Sword martial arts, 1,000 swords and 10,000 swords powerhouses were unable to control the god-burning ghost curse. There was a high possibility that the person behind the soul-burning curse was a sky swordsman or even a guardian. If that was the case, then it would be troublesome. In the Sky Swordsman, the Sky Guardian and the Sky Sword Slave were supreme existences. If one of them planted the soul-burning curse in Jiu Qianxing's body, then Jiu Qianxing would not be able to take revenge. Noticing Nie Fenghua's evasion, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown and ask in a deep voice, Father, is the person behind Black Snake very powerful? Yes. Nie Fenghua nodded and didn't continue talking about the person behind her. Instead, she said, the most important thing now is to think of a way to save them. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that Nie Fenghua was intentionally avoiding him, so he didn't ask any further. Indeed, the most important thing right now was not to take revenge, but to think of a way to help Jiu Qianxing recover. But looking at Jiu Qianxing's current state, it seemed as if he was about to die. Lu Xian didn't know how to save him. Ghost Emperor, do you have a way? Nie Tian asked the Ghost Emperor after a moment of silence. He had no idea how to save them, so he could only ask the Ghost Emperor. After all, the Ghost Emperor was once a saint and knew a lot, so he might have a solution. The Divine Burning Ghost Curse is one of the 9 great ancient evil curses. In ancient times, someone had used the Divine Burning Ghost Curse to kill hundreds of thousands of experts whose strength was close to the peak of the Sage Realm in one night. From then on, the Soul-Burning Ghost Curse became a taboo name. The Ghost Emperor said, I didn't expect that the Divine Burning Ghost Curse would appear in this small area of the sky. So the Divine Burning Ghost Curse is one of the 9 great ancient evil curses. No wonder it's so overbearing. Nie Tian's eyes flickered. He hadn't expected the Divine Burning Ghost Curse to have such a background. The person who cast the Divine Burning Ghost Curse on your friend is still very weak. It should only be a level 1 Ghost Curse. Otherwise, your friend would have died a long time ago. The Ghost Emperor's face was gloomy as he continued, If your friend had been cursed, I would still have a way to save him. But now, he can only wait for death. Wait for death? Nie Tian's eyes trembled and his face stiffened when he heard this. He and Jiu Qianxing were sworn brothers. The two of them had finally met, so how could he just watch the latter wait for death? Nie Tian, your friend has already become a corpse-eating ghost slave. His situation will only get worse in the future. In the end, he will become a skeleton. If you want him to die a better death, kill him now, the Ghost Emperor said coldly. Corpse-eating ghost slave was Jiu Qianxing's current state. The reason Jiu Qianxing was still alive was because Mo Qianjun had been feeding him beast corpses. Otherwise, Jiu Qianxing would have died a long time ago. The corpse-eating ghost slave was the state a martialist would be in after their consciousness was completely burned by the Divine Burning Ghost Curse. The corpse-eating ghost slave had already lost its consciousness. It only had the most basic desire to eat, and it was only interested in corpses. No way. Nie Tian suddenly came to his senses, and with a low growl, refused decisively. He didn't believe that there was no way to save Zhu Qianxing. Nie Tian. Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and said, Zhu Qianxing can no longer be saved. The best outcome for him now is to be killed by us. This. Emo Qianjun was stunned for a moment, and couldn't say a word. His eyes were clearly moist. In his heart, he had already prepared for the worst. But Nie Fenghua had said it so bluntly. It was hard for him to accept. Nie Tian's face was gloomy, and his expression was so gloomy that it was frightening. Nie Tian, perhaps this emperor has a way. At this time, a pleasantly surprised voice rang out. It was the Saint Spirit Blood Seal Lulu. Lulu had been helping Nie Tian refine the heaven punishment power, so he rarely spoke. What way? Nie Tian's eyes trembled and he cried out in surprise. He was like a drowning man who had suddenly found a life-saving straw. The heaven punishment power. Lulu paused for a moment and said in a deep voice. The heaven punishment power? Nie Tian was stunned. He asked in surprise. The heaven punishment power can save Zhu Qianxing? Perhaps it can, but this emperor isn't sure. Lulu was unsure. He said, when you approached him just now, this emperor felt that the heaven punishment power seemed to be suppressing the curse power in his body. Nie Tian exclaimed in surprise. His eyes flickered as if he had seen hope. Indeed, when he approached Zhu Qianxing, the latter seemed to be afraid and involuntarily retreated. It was very strange. Logically speaking, a person who had completely lost his mind would not be afraid of anything. If that's the case, there's a chance. At this time, the Ghost Emperor's eyes flashed with a strange light. He said, if the heaven punishment power can really suppress the divine burning ghost curse, then we can first use the heaven punishment power to force out the divine burning ghost curse power in his body. Then, we can use the power of the heavenly Tao to help him slowly recover his divine sense. As long as his divine sense recovers, his martial body might recover. Alright, let's do that. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he nodded his head. Since there was a chance to save Zhu Qianxing, he naturally would not hesitate. Next, Nie Tian used half a day to slightly recover before he prepared to save Zhu Qianxing. Phew! He arrived in front of Zhu Qianxing and let out a long breath to relieve his nervousness. The current Zhu Qianxing was too weak, and the heaven punishment power was too violent. If he was not careful, he could be instantly killed. Nie Tian did not have a deep understanding of the heaven punishment power, so he had to be very careful when saving Zhu Qianxing. Nie Tian, are you ready? At this time, Liuliu's voice sounded. He was ready to release the heaven punishment power. Nie Tian had gone through 3 heaven punishment tempering sessions, so he had only absorbed a small portion of the heaven punishment power. Most of the heaven punishment power was stored with Lulu. Chapter 33-23. 10,000 Sword Mountain Boom. The power of the heavenly punishment continued to pour out, and at the same time, the power of the stars seeped into it, calming the violent aura. Zhu Qianxing wanted to retreat, but he didn't have enough time. His entire body was instantly enveloped by the power of the heavenly punishment. Roar! The power of heaven's punishment entered his body, forcefully suppressing the power of the soul-burning ghost curse. Zhu Qianxing howled in pain, his voice echoing through the void, shrill and piercing. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and turned to look at Emo Qianjun. Emo Qianjun understood and released his sword will to seal the entire valley. Zhu Qianxing's cries were too loud. If the valley wasn't sealed off, it would have alarmed many people. Nie Tian looked at Zhu Qianxing, who was in extreme pain, but his face was gloomy. He didn't stop. Instead, he unleashed the power of heaven's punishment even more violently. This was Zhu Qianxing's only chance. No matter how much pain he had to endure, Nie Tian had to continue. Ah! Then, an even more mournful scream reverberated in the valley, making one's heart tremble. Crack, crack, crack! A moment later, Jiu Qianxing's body seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure of the heavenly punishment, and his bones actually began to crack bit by bit. "Oh no!" the ghost monarch exclaimed. It was obvious that Jiu Qianxing could not take it anymore. If this continued, his body would explode. Shackles of the heavenly Tao, break. At that moment, Nie Tian's expression darkened. Shackles of the Tao of the heavens surged out of his body, and they shot toward Jiu Qianxing like wild snake. The ghost emperor's expression flickered as he exclaimed, "Nie Tian, are you insane?" Jiu Qianxing couldn't take it anymore, but Nie Tian was still going to use the power of the heavenly Tao shackles. Wasn't he just going to kill Jiu Qianxing? This is his only chance, I can't give it up. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he growled like a wild beast. Following this, streams of blood suddenly burst out from the tip of his finger and soaked into the heavenly Tao shackles. Then, the heavenly shackles released blood-colored runes that attached themselves to Jiu Qianxing's body. Nie Tian used his own blood energy to fuse with the power of the heavenly Tao to maintain the stability of Jiu Qianxing's martial body. Boom! Following which, he released the power of the heavenly punishment and the power of the stars even more frantically, slowly seeping into Jiu Qianxing's body. Jiu Qianxing fainted under the immense pain. His aura was extremely weak, and it was concealed by the power of heaven's punishment. 99976 At this moment, he didn't have the time to check on Jiu Qianxing's fate, and he could only forcefully force out the soul incineration curse within the latter's body. After a long while, Jiu Qianxing's body released waves of black qi. The qi was sinister and extremely poisonous. It was the soul-burning curse. Nie Tian had forced the god-burning curse out of Jiu Qianxing's body with heavenly punishment power and star power. 964 MO 1006 666,017 and 668 million 7-inch 6 and Monarch and 666,000 time. Xing time. Only then did he realize that Nie Tian was already drenched in sweat, and his face was as pale as a sheet. Nie Tian hadn't fully recovered to begin with, and forcibly using the power of the heavenly beheader had put great pressure on him. Adding the fact that he had used the Tao of Heaven's shackles and consumed a large amount of flesh power, he was on the verge of collapsing. "I'm fine." Nie Tian took a deep breath to steady himself. He waved his hand and said, "Go check on Jiu Qian." "Okay." Mo Qianjun answered and went to Jiu Qianxing. The latter was unconscious, but his breath was still there. It was weak, but stable. "He's fine now." Mo Qianjun was overjoyed when he sensed that thousand no longer had the aura of the spirit-burning curse. He looked at Nie Tian with tears in his eyes. It was hard to imagine that Nie Tian had successfully forced the spirit-burning curse out of Jiu Qianxing's body. One had to admit that Nie Tian was a madman who dared to take risk. If he had stopped just now, Jiu Qianxing might have died. If Nie Tian had not used the heavenly Tao shackles and blood to stabilize Jiu Qianxing's body, he would have died. Nie Tian let out a long breath of turbid air, feeling as if a huge rock that had been hanging over his heart had finally been lifted. Nie Fenghua also heaved a sigh of relief. She looked at Nie Tian and nodded. For Nie Tian, that moment was more terrifying than a life-and-death battle. If he had failed to save Jiu Qianxing, he would have regretted it for the rest of his life. Then, Nie Tian rested for a while, and his pale face finally looked a little better. "Nie Tian, your friend is fine for now. Let me show you the sky sword martialism." Nie Fenghua came to Nie Tian's side and said. Nie Tian nodded and smiled. Yeah. That was exactly what he was planning to do. He had just come to the sky sword martialism and was unfamiliar with everything here. He needed to learn more about it. "Brother Mo, please stay here and take care of Brother Jiu. Father and I will look around." Nie Tian turned to Mo Qianjun and said with a smile. Then, he left the valley with Nie Fenghua. "I didn't expect Lord Nie Qianjian to be Brother Nie's father." Emo Qianjun looked at the place where Nie Fenghua and Nie Tian disappeared. He could not help but laugh and murmured. Emo Qianjun was no stranger to Nie Fenghua because the former was a 1,000-sword. There were not many thousand swordsmen in the sky sword martialism. It was not strange that Emo Qianjun knew Nie Fenghua. But he never expected Nie Fenghua to be Nie Feng's father. After Nie Tian and Nie Fenghua left the valley, they came to a high altitude. So the sky sword martialism is so big. Nie Tian looked down at the endless mountain range, and could not help but exclaim, Nie Tian, this is only a part of the sky sword martialism. The entire sky sword martialism is much bigger than what you see. Nie Fenghua smiled and said, this is a world of swordsmen. Everything here exists for swordsmen. Okay. Nie Tian nodded. When he first entered the sky sword martialism, he had already felt that the space here was filled with a strong sword intent. This sword intent was very useful for swordsmen's cultivation. Father, what are those sword shadows? At this moment, Nie Tian discovered something strange. His expression changed as he pointed to the void and asked. The mountain range below was very strange. There was a huge sword shadow floating above each peak. The sword shadows released a strong aura of sword intent in the void. In fact, when Nie Tian first arrived at the sky sword martialism, he had already noticed the sword shadows in the air. However, he did not look carefully at the time. It turned out that there were sword shadows floating above each peak. At this moment, he looked down from the sky and saw that there were thousands of sword shadows in the sky. They were like giants standing on the sky. It was a shocking sight. That's the Sword Mountain, the myriad layers Sword Mountain. Nie Fenghua's eyes narrowed as he looked at the sword shadows. His expression turned grave.